Good evening, and welcome to the September 11th, 2019 meeting of the Plan Commission of the City of Lake Forest. 9/11, 18 years ago today, and we all honor those who perished, those who were first responders, those who either were aiding in any part of the recovery or working on Wall Street who have since suffered health issues because of that day. I heard on the media within the last 24 hours that the suggestion is that 9/11 be remembered in the future as a day of service. And I would simply suggest that tonight we are all performing a service, our right to assemble, our right to have local government representation, to have civil discourse, and it's a right and a privilege. I would now like to introduce James Moorhead, who is new to the Plan Commission and also serves as our liaison with the Zoning Board. James?
Evening.
And I would also now like all commission members to introduce themselves, beginning with Mr. Dixon.
Good evening. John Dixon.
Susan Atkinson.
Michael Freeman.
Monica Artman-Ruggles.
And James Moorhead.
Rosemary Kerr. We now have a happy occasion. We are here to commemorate Guy Berg's participation, and he was a very meaningful representative to the Plan Commission. A lot of artistic talent through his architecture background, which was very much appreciated on a number of occasions. Some of the transactions in which he worked were the Bicycle Master Plan in 2013, the Amberley Woods Commercial Site Development, St. James Subdivision, Oak Knoll Woodlands in 2015, the TIF District in 2014, Laurel and Western Avenues redevelopment, Estate Lane Subdivision, McKinley Road redevelopment, which is ongoing, the Preserve at Wesley, the Gallery Restaurant, Saunders Roads, Chase Bank, McCormick Nature Preserve subdivision, and many more. Guy has also been a volunteer and previously served on the Building Review Board from 2001 to 2005, and the Historic Preservation Commission from 2006 to 2012. And we will miss his comments in particular on the design aspects of these developments. Guy, thank you very much for your service. Next item is consideration of approval of the minutes of the June 20th, 2019 and July 10, 2019 Plan Commission meetings. Do any commissioners have any corrections or addendums to suggest for the minutes of these two meetings?
I just have a few typos that I will pass on to Kathy for the July 2019 meeting. And then I just wanted to point out on something that I caught on the March 2019 meetings. We had that in our packet somewhere, but I never said that the library looked like a converted warehouse. I was talking about the new building on 711 McKinley. So I have the copies of these, and I'll give those to you, Kathy.
I'd just like to add that on the June 20 meeting minutes that on page 7, my acquaintance with Mr. Whitmer and Mr. Altsunian. Just to add that.
Steve Douglas has passed in some typos, and I have also passed a few in to Kathy Cerniak. All those in favor of approving the minutes of the June 20 meeting, say aye.
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 The June 20 minutes are passed. All those who wish to approve the meeting minutes from July 10, 2019, please say aye.
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 Aye. And those minutes are now approved as well. Our next item of business is a public hearing and potential action with continued consideration of a request for approval of Phase 3 of the McKinley Road redevelopment. Approval of the overall site plan, a plat of a consolidation, and related approvals. 2 buildings are proposed as the final phase of the development, a multi-unit building on the south portion of the site, and a duplex 2-unit building on the north portion of the property. Property owner, well, at this point, it's the city of Lake Forest. The developers are Peter Whitmer and Todd Altunian. I'm going to ask at this time for any ex parte or contacts or any conflicts of interest on the part of board members.
No.
No. Presenting for the petitioner is Peter Whitmer, architect. Thank you.
Great. Hi, do you want to swear me in, or no, you don't need to do that?
Well, we can. Okay.
I think you should.
Then
Yes,
at
you
this
should.
time,
And-
why don't we swear in all those who intend to speak on either the McKinley Road transaction, the Swift property transaction, or the code amendments to rules and definitions, interpretation of the city zoning code pertaining to recreational cannabis. Any and all, would you please stand? Okay. Do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you are about to give or have previously given is true and correct to your best knowledge?
I do.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Whitmer?
Great. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to come back and present what we have currently for Phase 3 of our 3-phase project. Just to review a little bit, we came back in June and had some preliminary ideas about it, explored some ideas about expanding the project into the neighborhood, and really thought it made a lot of sense just to go forward with the property that we're showing here currently. This is the area of the Phase 3. The first building's about 75%, 80% occupied. The second building now, the 705 building, which is here, is excavating. We're just about ready to pour the basement floor on that. So those phases are going forward. The other thing that we established when we were at the Phase 2 was the south end of the Phase 3 area, which we designated as green open space for the Phase 3 project. We talked about, in our last meeting, about a 2-building project. One being what I'm going to refer to as the 715 McKinley, which would be the south building, and then the 651 Westminster being the duplex. We looked at this and we're establishing the setbacks for it, and this illustration here shows that. So we're proposing a 15-foot setback on the east elevation here, the 49 feet, which would be the open space to the south, 48 feet to the building, and 36 feet to the edge of the porch. On the duplex, we're proposing that the current alley is 17 feet at the narrowest point, which is here. We're proposing that to change to 20 feet. And the setback on the west elevation of the duplex building would be 38 feet. And then the north-south street actually widens here at this, so there's a utility pole here to 25 feet width, and then the setback would be 34 feet on the 715 building. The size of the footprints that we're proposing, the 715 building we're proposing would be a little over 6,000 square feet footprint, would be 3 floors, and for a total footprint or total area of about 17,000, a little over 17,000 square feet. The duplex building would have a footprint of 3,740 square feet, would be 2 stories. And we're proposing a duplex that's horizontal, so it'd be a first floor and then a second floor above that. And that would be a total of 7,480 square feet as we have currently. The dimensions are indicated here on this plan. The parking for this project has been all underground. We're proposing that for phase 3 too. So the entrance, what we're proposing is one parking underground structure for both of the buildings. There'd be 18 spaces in there that would allow for, I think, 4 units at 3 spaces and 3 units at 2 spaces. The surface parking for guests, and that would be, we have 2 additional spaces that are to the north end, the 3 existing spaces on the west side, and then the 9 spaces that we have currently on the east-west drive. The pedestrian circulation is really defined the same way as it's been as we proposed in the original master plan, which would have a sidewalk on both sides of the east-west one-way street, and it would connect up then into a sidewalk that goes on the east side of the north-south street, and then ties with a sidewalk that would go into the library and have pedestrian access. All those will be public easements that would be the public that can move through the site. One of the things that I think last time we didn't bring the model, and now we have the model here, which is, I think, a really good illustration 3-dimensionally of how we're thinking of this. One of the things in the beginning that we were concerned about was the end axis on the east-west street and how this building would terminate that. We've looked at that and feel it's most appropriate to have porches and terraces that look out that terminate that axis on there. They relate to the porches and terraces on the existing 2 buildings, and I think it not only terminates the axis visually, but also then allows for those units to have outdoor spaces that can visually look back at Market Square through that. So this illustrates that. The other is that this is the open space that allows light to come in through at the end of the axis through that space. The height relationship, what we talked about was having, this is the 715, that's not 705, it's actually 715 height relationship to the existing building. And what we really wanted to do was we wanted to take this 2-story idea and have a shingled roof on top of it, so that our cornice line of, this is the existing building here, this is the entrance ramp down, the alley space, and then this is the building that we're proposing to the south. We can see here that I just took this piece of the building and just brought it down here, but this cornice line really lines up, so it's like this, a 2-story piece of this building is a relationship, because we felt that it was important to have some relationship to the other 2 buildings in terms of scale. So the idea is that it reads as a 2-story building with a roof on top of it, as opposed to these buildings, which are 3 stories. So there's this cornice line here, and then there's the stone cornice line here, and basically pull that around this building, which relates to it, and the scale drops down. This just shows the site section on the east-west, which is our existing 723, 727 building. This is the proposed structure, and then it shows the 2 structures to the east and its relationship spatially to each other. Then looking on the north-south axis, this is the library piece here currently. This would be our southern building, the 705 or the 715 building, and then the 361 Westminster building, which would be the two-story structure. And these would be separated by 15 feet in our current proposal. This just shows this is moving down, so this would be Westminster's here, the relationship of the houses across the street, and the relationship of our duplex, and then as it steps up into the southern building. This is just it all together to show that relationship. This is a study in terms of heights of the existing context and how our building fits into that. This is the 333 Westminster building, and then this single-family house that's attached to that. In relation, this is the alley piece, and then this is what we're proposing. So that we've tried to capture the, this is a two-story structure with a roof on top, with the porches on the front element. So it has a residential scale to it and relates to the streetscape that we're proposing. We have looked at some different drive configurations, and we have one in the model that we show that comes out on Westminster, and we also have studied one that is a 90-degree angle that actually comes out in the alley too. So we're contemplating two different solutions. We see benefits to each of those, and we thought that when we go through the HPC process that might shed some light on information for that. In terms of what we think is an advantage. You know, the way we see it is that in one way, I'll show you a perspective, and further we can discuss that a little bit. This is the streetscape on Westminster, so this is the existing 333 building, and then this is the 373 property to the east, and then the 401 property going east. So those are relationships of our buildings to the surrounding neighbors. This is just a perspective looking east on Westminster at the intersection. Really here, because our building is back around the corner of the single-family house attached to the 333 existing condo, you really can't see any of our building at this from this perspective. This would be if you come down the street and you'd see the relationship that's the massing of the single family, and then this would be what we were proposing, and then this is the property next to the east of this. This is coming back west, going west on Westminster, and again you see here the existing 333 building, what we're proposing for our duplex, and then the existing neighbor to the east. This is just a plot of consolidation, which shows all the legal language in terms of consolidating all the parcels into one parcel. I think that's pretty much it. You know, we see this as a long process, and we've started it a while ago, and look forward to hearing all the comments tonight and comments from the board, and making modifications would seem to make sense, and move forward with it. So look forward to I think one of the things that's been really satisfying is we have residents there now, and people really like living there. I mean, I think all the things that the Plan Commission did in terms of making this a viable location for residential, walkable, park your car, use goods and services within the CBD, all those things. People are really, enjoy being in this location, and so I think that's been a lot of our success, has been that the location is so good in terms of the walkabilities, and that's really what started out in the Plan Commission, saying that this made a lot of sense for multifamily residential in this. With that, I'd like to turn it back over to you and answer any questions you might have.
I think we'd like to hear comments of staff and then be able to take a break and come down and take a look at the model.
I'd like to start with some background. This overall project has been before the Plan Commission a number of times over the course of a number of years. The City Council has long recognized the area east of McKinley and west of the single-family home neighborhoods as a transition area. That's been talked about as a transition area for decades. A number of years ago, when the Historical Society was still in the location, the City Council directed that an ad hoc committee be put together, and that ad hoc committee called this area the Cultural Corridor. And it was identified as that because of the Historical Society, the library, Gorton, and the college a little bit further away. And the idea was, how do we make that corridor more walkable? After that cultural corridor discussion, the Historical Society spent probably over a year thinking about what their future was. We saw a number of plans, additions and significant repairs and restoration to the existing building. Plans for a completely new building, essentially a museum on that site with parking. Ultimately, the Historical Society, now the History Center, relocated not far from here to the corner of Washington and Deer Path. At that time, some reference was made that we now have a cultural triangle. Still a walkable area, but the library, Gorton Community Center, and the History Center and the college all in close proximity. So that's some of the history from the cultural corridor perspective. Once the City Council understood that the Historical Society was moving, the city stepped back, and just about at the same time, the 3 office parcels fronting on McKinley were in play. We understood that it was likely that those were going to be acquired, or some of them, in fact, had been acquired. So it was important to have the discussion of what that area should be. Those parcels could have been, the office buildings could have been retained, restored, upgraded to higher standard office space, or new office buildings with significant parking could have been built there. With the Plan Commission's direction, the City Council did determine that office uses should no longer be located on the east side of the railroad tracks. They felt that that was an anomaly, that was really inconsistent with the cultural, the library, Gorton Community Center, and the residential neighborhood, and that there was some real benefit to relocating offices on the east side of the railroad tracks, closer to restaurants and businesses, to really help the vitality of the central business district. So as a result, this area was identified for residential, even though the zoning still would permit multifamily residential or office use. As part of that conversation, now that the parcel that the Historical Society was on was no longer needed for that purpose, the city moved quickly to demolish the building. The building had significant structural issues. It had mechanical issues. There were water infiltration issues, but the west wall of the building was literally buckling, so there was some immediate concerns. The city does still own that property, but in discussions about developing this area, the council felt strongly that the best way to look at that property was to think about this area holistically, as opposed to allowing each of those 5 properties to develop independently. So an overall development plan was approved. You have that master plan in your packet. That is dated December 2016. That master plan wasn't intended to specifically dictate the footprint of the building, but certainly was intended to provide a framework and a guide. And along with that, redevelopment recommendations were also developed. Those are also in your packet. The city did enter into a purchase sale agreement with the developer once the developer of the 3 McKinley parcels was known. Part of That agreement required some open space, required some part of the property that is being developed as the second phase to be dedicated or transferred back to the city to provide additional parking for the library. But it was envisioned that what is now before you as Phase 3 would be part of this overall development. So Phase 1 obviously is complete. Some of the last few units are being built out. Phase 2 is under construction. Phase 3 is back before you really for an analysis and evaluation of whether the plan is consistent, is generally consistent with the master plan, generally consistent with the recommendations. Based on the staff review, we do believe that this plan is generally consistent with the master plan. It achieves the goal of increasing the opportunity for housing units near the central business district, creating product types that we don't necessarily have. The issue that the commission has talked about a number of times, and we still hear much conversation about, is do the Phase 3 buildings as they're currently configured achieve an appropriate transition? The discussion was that as we moved from McKinley Road through Phase 1 and Phase 2, the buildings would scale down, that we would acknowledge that there needs to be some transition from this higher density development and the single-family residential properties to the east. Tonight, this again has been before you a number of times. Staff is not recommending that you take action, but really it is time to give clear direction on whether this plan is consistent with the master plan, consistent with the recommendations, and if the site plan is, the number of units, the type of uses, if those are consistent with the master plan and the transition piece is the issue, then it would be worthwhile to seek input from the Historic Preservation Commission on building massing, on roof forms, on architectural styles, materials. Should the buildings evoke the details and materials of the first two buildings, or should they should one or more of the buildings begin to move in a different direction? The Historic Preservation Commission would also look at hardscape, and they would look at a landscape plan. You do not yet have a landscape plan in front of you, but if this appears to be moving in a direction consistent with the master plan, we would recommend that you give that direction and move it forward to the Historic Preservation Commission. If, on the other hand, you believe that this is not moving in a direction consistent with the master plan, it probably is time to give that clear message to the petitioner, and then we would have different discussions about the future of this property. With that, I think I will end, but at some point I know, Chairman, you wanted me to read the comments from Commissioner Douglas, who couldn't be here tonight. I don't know whether you want me to do that now or later.
That would be fine to do now.
Okay.
On this particular agenda item.
Commissioner Douglas was unable to attend and did provide comments, and I will read those verbatim. As currently designed, the duplex building and the multifamily building appear as one building, each with slightly different massings from the other, but both being part of one long block of consistent width and connected at two levels by porches or decks in the middle. Despite the fact that they share an underground garage, the buildings should appear more separate and distinct from each other. The duplex building scale is not compatible with other homes along Westminster, and it lacks the architectural articulation of its neighbors. The building presents long, relatively flat walls and a massive roof to the east and west. Some effort should be made to break up the mass of those walls and roof in order that the building can be more compatible with the smaller scale and more defined articulation of its neighbors to the east, west, and north. This could be accomplished by introducing setbacks in the facades, perhaps for open porches, and corresponding articulation in the roof. The duplex building should not be connected to the multifamily building at the second floor for the same reasons. Consideration should be given to using different materials on the two buildings. The duplex building's garage entrance should be moved off of the Westminster streetscape to the west of the building. The grade change associated with the depressed ramp is not compatible with the Westminster streetscape. Given the proximity to Westminster of the neighbor to the west, and the fact that Westminster curves slightly to the north at this site, the duplex building's north facade porch slightly intrudes into the setback, which seems acceptable. The duplex building's design needs further development. It currently has brick jack arches above the windows. On the south elevation, similarly, the gable on the south elevation is stripped down and less articulated than the gables on the north and west elevations. The HPC should review the duplex building, given its proximity to contributing structures and its location in the historic district.
Thank you. And we appreciate Commissioner Douglas's comments, as he does also have an architecture background. I would like members of the board to take a moment or two to take a look at the model before we open to questions from the board.
Do you need orientation, or you know where you're at? Okay.
And it's only 7 units now.
What?
It's only 7 units. Right. The whole thing. The city's whole contribution went from up to 14 down to 7.
Now we would open the meeting up to questions for the petitioner and/or staff from members of the board. And we'll begin. What?
That's why my phone went off. Yeah. Yeah, you can't stop that noise. That's why my phone went off.
Oh,
Downstairs.
Oh, really? Till 7:45.
Let me look.
Right.
It goes till
Okay.
7:45.
Until 7:20. Okay. Should we take a
Well, I
temporary
saw it on the-
adjournment
yeah, I think so.
to seek shelter downstairs?
So see, there's the radar. So you got about 20 minutes.
You all right?
We are now back in session for the September 11th, 2019 City of Lake Forest Plan Commission, and we are discussing the McKinley Road redevelopment, and we're at a portion of the meeting where we have questions and requests for clarification from commission members to petitioner or staff. Commissioner Ruggles.
My first question is for staff. When the project is complete, are there going to be 3 separate parcels, or will they all be consolidated into one?
It is my understanding that there will be 3 separate parcels, but the petitioner, the entire project, is that
Right. The
phase 1,
entire,
phase 2, phase 3?
yeah.
Yeah, I'm not, well, let me just try to answer it, and then I'll see if I do it or not.
Okay.
There will be 3 separate associations, so each building will have its own association and be responsible for its own building. There'll be, and then an overall association that takes care of the road, and the maintenance of the road is a common element between the 3 buildings.
Okay. The main reason I'm asking that is more in regards to setbacks, because I've noticed that, so this, this 3rd phase, the setbacks are different than the phase 1 and 2, because phase 1 and 2 were zoned, office space. So this is a different, there's different setbacks. So you have the front yard off of Westminster, the rear yard is off the library. So if all these parcels are then potentially put into one, I'm just wondering then, would it still conform to whatever new zoning this one parcel would have?
I don't believe the intention is to consolidate the ownership of the phase 1 property with the phase 2 property and with the phase 3 property.
Right.
There will be 3
different
3 separate ownerships.
But, yeah.
So the setbacks that are being, provided to us for this phase 3 would be the setbacks no matter what, moving forward?
Yes, I can't say that the zoning for the area might not change in the future. Certainly zoning changes on occasion, but there's no proposal to change the zoning for this property. And yes, as planned, as presented, there would be 3 separate parcels, and the setbacks as described would apply.
Okay. So I have some more questions. Most of these are related to the site plan. For further discussion later on, do you have copies of the previous options that you presented at the earlier meetings?
Sure.
Can I just ask for clarification? Not the ones that included the parcel to the east, right? Because that's not in play. So when we're talking about options, we're talking about options that just related to the site as it exists now, right?
Yeah, I'm looking, I kind of want to see what the process has been for the phase 3 and phase 4. For, first, in the master plan, the northern part of phase 3 was a single family or duplex, and there wasn't even a building put on that master plan. And then there was like the building, and then I think I recall that you had another plan that you showed some kind of single-family footprint, and now we have the plan that's before us, and I'm just curious to know that you have it for further questions, because my question is going to be one of the questions is, I believe that the footprint that you're presenting is larger than that you've presented in any of the other previous renditions for phase 3. And I just wanted to see if that was my recollection or not.
This is what we presented at the last meeting for the, we had a bunch of schemes where we looked out into the neighborhood and we said, oh, we're not doing these. Doesn't make any sense. So this is the one that we presented at the July meeting.
And was there one before that, or the one before that was simply the master plan where there was no building at all indicated on the northern section?
When we first conceived this project, we didn't think we were gonna own that parcel.
Okay.
So, you know, we didn't, that wasn't part of our development, we didn't have that. So I think could be the reason we didn't, you know, pursue that.
Okay.
When we look to incorporate that into the project as part of, you know, so it expanded. So we didn't have that as part of it, we didn't own it, we didn't, you know, so we had the southern portion of it, but we didn't have the northern parcel
Okay.
for that.
So with you having the scheme up, it's kind of a good comparison to what you're presenting right now. So would you say that the buildings in Scheme C are larger or smaller than what you're proposing for today?
I think when we were looking at this schematically, you can see here, we were thinking of having a drive split. So actually, you can see these buildings are pretty much lined up on the face. And so what we did is really took the space between here and slid this building back. This building is virtually the same size as what we are presenting now.
Okay.
And basically what we did is instead of having the drive in between the two buildings, in this building basically paralleling the two in the front, we took the space here and slid the building back and had the entrance come on to the end so that we could move the building back from the front yard setback further.
So is that the reason that you changed the underground parking access from the center location to the Westminster?
We thought it made a lot more sense in terms of having the buildings not as close to the street, so that was an advantage to that too. And it works out, it's a little bit problematic in terms of how to get down to the ramp and go into the two different garages in two different ways. So it loses a fair amount of space in terms of the interior garage of that. So we thought then the next scheme that we, you know what, let me go back. I think I have on this. So actually in the model, you see that other, so our next scheme was to come in, oops. The next scheme was to come in and looked at the, to make a 90-degree turn in the front yard, basically, and have an interior courtyard. And that we show this here, that's what we built the model for. We thought that had some merit. So this guy fits in this way, where you had a drive. So that was our second thought that made some sense. The advantage of this was it kept everything out here, pushed this building back from, you know, from this location to this location. So we had further setbacks, made these buildings tighter. And then we thought, well, it might make more sense to just come straight in this way. I mean, I think both these options are better. The space between the two to come in and go down one side and then go down the other side is pretty difficult to make that work in terms of that. So that's kind of evolution of where we were from our last meeting in June to where we are today.
Okay.
If that helps.
So I think that there'll probably be further discussion from the other board members about the location of the ramp, because I think that in either of those locations on Westminster, there's some concerns. If it comes down through your private roadway and turns into the building, I think there's a concern about how close that is to Westminster and if traffic is backing up and things like that, or as opposed to if it's a direct shot off of Westminster.
I mean, I understand those different things. I think what we've learned with the building that we completed and actually with the 333 building is the volume of traffic that comes out in and out of those buildings is we don't need to make those ramps as wide as we think they should be. Because the likelihood of somebody pulling down into their side of the lane when you go in these buildings, I mean, I do it every day, and I've quizzed people. You drive down the center of the drive. You wait for the door to open. When the door opens, if by chance there's somebody coming up, you pull to one side, one goes by, and the other one goes by. So we don't have to have these ramps. So two cars have to, be able to pass all the time. It isn't, there isn't the volume that requires that. So we did think about that, because we thought it would be a lot better if we don't have to have a, 20-foot wide or even 18-foot wide drive down to this. The narrower we can get it, the better. Less pavement, less visual, more from the streetscape, all that. So we're pretty comfortable with the idea that we can narrow the ramp down. We thought going straight out to Westminster, we can make it even narrower because you're going straight. When you're on the curve, it complicates it a little bit more.
Okay.
All right.
So, I think that's my questions for the parking ramp, but I had questions about your surface parking then as well. So you said then you have 14 spaces for guest parking, is that correct?
Correct.
And is that for all 4 buildings?
That's for all 4 buildings, correct?
Does that meet code, or is that something that you just did as a
I think it-
bonus?
I think it probably, on the overall parking, we exceed the code by quite a bit. And again, our experience has been at Regents Road too, where they have, I think, 6 spaces in front with 20 units, similar kind of situation. We understand that the parking currently is somewhat full during the day, but we have 3 units under construction, and the majority of that parking has been related to the construction. The other thing that's nice about this site is it's close to surface parking in the evening, so you can park on the street on McKinley and in the train station after hours. And typically, if somebody has a party or that, you've got places to park, and it's reasonable distances to walk to that. But we haven't had any issues. So I think from what I understand, we exceed the code in terms of the parking required for it. And we really haven't had any issues in other projects that we've done with this kind of amount of parking.
Okay, so then for those 2 surface parking that are just north of the duplex, if you didn't have to have those, that could be green space.
I think we could definitely look at that. Yeah, because we thought we could add them in, but I think I actually think we really could study that. One of the things that we really wanted to look at was, where does a landscaping truck park when it comes? Because it comes on a weekly basis. Fortunately, it's the same landscaping truck for all the 333 building, our building, and these other buildings. But right now, it's a real problem because it's only 17 feet wide and it parks in the 17-foot wide piece. When the people come out of the 333 building, it's very, very tight. So what we've really done is made that street wide enough and wider down toward the south end, so the landscaping truck can park there, people can drive by it very comfortably. So, that was one of our big concerns. I know it's been voiced through the residents of the 333 building too, is their frustration with that. And so we sort of have this loading area or side parking that can happen along the north-south street toward the south end. Although we wouldn't really want to designate that as a parking spaces, just because one is we don't want people to continually park there. If my comparison is Regents Road, because I am there 5 days a week, 6 days a week working, and I see it. And there we have one-way traffic, the same situation, and people park along that side. Again, the traffic is so small that people just wait and go by. If they have some problem going by, you can drive around each one. So we feel like that's pretty comfortable. But having a big truck with a trailer and being able to place to park it and still drive by is one of our bigger concerns. But I agree with you that we could absolutely study the idea of not having the 2 parking spaces, because they kind of just hang out there. I mean, it's not a great location for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
My initial impression when I saw the site plan was, I don't see the green space that I thought we were going to see, especially like from the master plan where the northern parcel was left open, to interpretation as a single-family residence. And, telling me that wasn't really part of your ownership at the time. I think, I thought it would be clear that we were looking for a lot of open space in this back parcel. And so my question, I kind of question then why the 651 duplex is such a large footprint, with it being, you said 3,740 square feet. Can you
Sure.
elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. You know, we're striving for the same goal in terms of, you know, having as much space as we can and shifting around. And, you know, and I think there's been the comments, well, you put the space in the south, so now you push it all north and all that. So, but the footprint as we have designed is really gives us, the footprint's 3,740 square feet. When we take out the elevator and the stairwells for that space, it puts a unit at about 3,000 square feet. And it's actually a little bit over that right now. And I think we have the ability to make that a little bit smaller. Our sales, basically, we get below, too much below the 3,000 square feet, you know, 2,500 square feet. It's really difficult to sell when the footprint gets too small. But I do think there's, you know, this is just a point in time. I think we have flexibility to make it smaller so that it really we can have impactful changes to the site plan which make it more open space. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't, I think we really want to study if we make the units 500 square feet smaller, you know, does that really impact the streetscape on Westminster? Does it really impact the neighbor to the east? Can we really make meaningful changes in terms of how that is? And I think, you know, I think, pretty sure that's going to be our direction of moving forward, you know, with a project is that. And I think, you know, the ramp location, how does that go? I mean, one of the reasons is that we like to put the ramp in that corner that we have. That's the lowest point on the site, so we don't have to go down. The ramp only has to be about 5 feet deep, you know, versus the other, it almost has to be about 8 feet deep. So, you know, the cut that you have to make and the walls that you have to cover and all that work much better at the lower point than the higher point. So I think, I mean, I'm bringing, I know I'm going over what you're answering, but I think there is flexibility in making that smaller. But our goal is to try to get something pretty close to 3,000 square feet in terms of a duplex.
Okay. And then I'll just kind of stick with one last general question about the green space and what I see as encroachment of the new buildings onto that green space on parcel 3-4. So now it seems that the buildings are almost connected by some kind of bridge or balcony, which to me seems like that's taking away green space. The front porch is extending over the front yard setback, right? Which is, again, kind of like, instead of like bringing it back, you're kind of stretching out the building as much as you can northwest. And then, is that also like a patio at the very southern part that's encroaching on the green space?
Let me just make sure I'm clear on what you're saying. So,
Okay.
I understand. So you're, there we go. You're talking about this piece.
No, I'm talking about the southern patio
this
on
piece
the, yeah.
at
Is
grade.
that a private
Yeah,
patio?
I mean, I think we, you know, our thought was that if that were at grade terrace for that you could come out from that unit and have that. If that is, you know, if we had to eliminate that, we could eliminate that.
Is that one level or is that
No, it
three
would just be
levels?
at grade. I think, you know, our thought is that if it's a grade, it really doesn't, you don't really, you know, so when you see it from here, you don't see it come over, and that they can, you know, they can utilize that space better. It would not be a multi-level. You know, I think absolutely when you have it multi-level. I think the other thing, I think in the elevations right now, we're showing the connection between the two buildings, and I don't think they work very well either.
And are those supposed to be decks or balconies?
You
I
know,
wasn't clear on that.
One of the things that we try to do in these units is give meaningful outdoor space, meaning that wider than 5 feet, you know, for the units themselves. So initially we thought, well, the space between these two buildings probably makes some sense, but I don't think it does. I mean, I think it you know, I think I read some Well, I think Steve's comments sort of addressed that, and I would agree with that too. I think it's problematic in terms of separating these buildings and making them feel separate ones when you have a piece through that. And to be honest, it's not very good outdoor space. I mean, you're right in between two buildings. You only look out one way or the other way. It's not very good space. You know, the space in front on this side is really good outdoor space. It's got a great view of Market Square. It comes in, you know, you have those things. It's the place you want to be. I don't think the space in between these two buildings makes any sense. The one thing that we tried to do is not have exterior outdoor space facing the east, so that we didn't have people outside into the neighbors, so that we tried to make the space in the front and have it in the south for that. We do have a lower terrace at the second floor level between the two buildings, which we've broken up that mass, but not at the third floor level. So it's down lower is the idea. So we try to be sensitive to those exterior spaces in terms of how they relate, and also make them pretty workable in terms of living in the units themselves.
Okay. And the encroachment of the first floor, or the duplex front porch into that front yard setback?
Into the 40 feet.
Yeah.
You know, it was a little bit of, we had it all put together, and then our terrace was 8 feet wide up there. And the difference between an 8-foot and a 12-foot terrace is really a big deal. It means you can get a table, you know, with 4 chairs around it and really use it. Otherwise, you can't. So we thought that the porch itself could encroach into that. But I think in the shrinking of the building, you know, if we pull it down, the 2 feet we could probably redo. It was more of a sort of at the end, we're like, we can't, you know, I don't want to get this thing approved, and then we have something that's like 8 feet wide. 8 feet wide is a really difficult number. It's not big enough to make it substantial.
Okay. All right, I'll end my questioning of the site plan now. I might have some more later about the building elevations, so, thanks.
Commissioner Dixon?
Just a couple of questions here that I have, maybe to follow up. The 361 building, it's set back 48 feet to the building line itself to the street, is that correct?
Correct. From the corner of the physical building, it's 48 feet. From the porch edge, I think it's 36.
Right, it
So,
gets
yeah.
smaller there.
And then the curve of the street, you know, I could probably, yeah, it's 30, there it shows it 48 here and 36 at the corner.
And then, the distance between the 361 building and the 715 building, what's the difference?
We have that as 15 feet. And that would be similar between the distance of 2 side yards and 7, you know, so the existing side yard setback 7 feet, so you have 7 feet and 7 feet would be the 15 feet between the two buildings, you know, in that zoning.
So what do you see happening in that little space there that, I mean, there's obviously no windows.
We're
to the
actually
south.
thinking about putting the HVAC units in that space. Because it's a pretty good, it's kind of a dead space.
Right.
Because there is a garage underneath it. You know, so it's tough to plan anything too big in there.
Would there be the possibility to put some, you know, landscaping?
Yeah,
around
I think we could study that with a landscape plan and see what we could do within that space.
And for clarification, the driveway that we're talking about for 361 that you currently show going north onto Westminster, just for clarification in my own mind, there's also the possibility that that could go to the west into the alleyway, is that correct, that you've talked about?
Yeah, let me see if I can pull that up. That's the one I pointed out in the model, but I'll just show it in plan. Yeah, here it is. Okay. So this is a plan that shows it going 90 degrees and turn to the west.
So the driveway's sort of coming in front of the unit itself.
Yeah, it comes in, and then it goes down underneath, so you're down underneath the porch, so the garage door gets hidden down because it's half a level, down underneath.
So the option would be to do it that way or straight out.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't change the location of the building at this point.
And is there any way to put that farther south on the 361 building, or it just doesn't work because it's too tight? Is that-
It's pretty much the radius it needs to be.
Yeah.
We can't really make it too much tighter than that.
Okay. And then the green space to the south of 715, how big is that area now, roughly?
It's about, so from, you're talking about
Well, I guess both parcels. I
both
was just
these?
yeah.
So this is 49 feet from the property edge here to the face of our building, and the width of that is, let me just pull it.
So 48.
48,
North,
hold on,
south.
yeah, there it is. It's 87 feet long in the phase 3, and it's it's a little shorter in the, from the edge of the ramp to the open space. Oops.
The open to the ramp of 705.
Yeah, so it's 87 there, and, this dimension is a little bit short, and that way it's a little bit wider in that. So it's like 50 by 80 on two of those. Early on, we did a comparison study that showed that that's pretty much the same space as Market Square. The green space within Market Square where the trees are, that's pretty much, just to give you a scale comparison,
Okay.
because I think it's hard to relate. I mean, now when you go out to the site, you can see it. So it's a little bit easier to get a visual on it now that everything's cleared away for them.
And then if you can throw up the slide that you were showing that had the Westminster view with the 361 offset and showing the 361 building as it relates to the property to the west there.
Okay, yeah.
This, yeah.
The elevation of those,
Yeah.
yeah, let me just pull it.
Probably. Okay, sorry about that.
This one?
Yes. So the height there, the difference between the 361 and the 351, roughly, you're showing,
It probably about 7 feet taller. I mean, one of the things that we looked at was we had the ability to lower the roof if we wanted to. We could cut this roof down and make it flat, because right now we're planning on this as being a well in here and hiding the mechanical equipment with inside the well of this. We actually could cut this down and make this lower. We felt like the proportion of the building were better because it were taller. And I think that's something that, we should study and look at in terms of when we get to HPC and look at those alternatives with that, because the roof could absolutely, realistically, this thing could be down. I mean, there isn't living space up in that area, so you could bring that roof down further to make that mass less.
okay. Thank you. I have no other questions.
Commissioner Freeman.
Thank you. Kathy, I had a few questions. We're pretty long in this process. As I recall, this concept was first presented to us at the end of 2016.
Yes,
So,
the council approved the master plan in January 2017. The approved plan from the commission is dated December 2016.
and I know you were here, Chair, and did you join us by then? I thought you were with that meeting as well. So my recollection, I think it would be helpful if we had, I think I recall it correctly. I recall it pretty much as Commissioner Ruggles recalls it. When it was presented to us at that time, we were approving, as is the purview of this commission as opposed to HPC or BRB, we were looking at essentially boxes on the site plan and saying roughly dimensionally, that's comfortable. And then from a density perspective, that's comfortable. We thought that though, and the only difference in my memory of it is that this building here, which I think is 715, the longer one anyway, was actually longer. Because at that time, we didn't have, to my memory, the 9 spaces that the city traded back to the library. So I, like you, had a different vision because I thought the green space would be oriented in a different way, not knowing that the city, which is the city council's purview, when they negotiated the contract, they decided they wanted to give those 9 spaces based on comments from folks related to the library. So it did change our orientation a little bit, but my memory was it was quite a bit longer. Yeah, and then,
Stretching into the open space.
right, and then although there was no box or picture for us to approve on it, Kathy, there was the description, single-family home or duplex, and then the discussion at the time was, would the city develop that on its own, or would it end up being wrapped into this development? But through that entire December 2016 discussion, we talked about, could it be one long row of townhomes that stretched like Regent's Row from one end all the way to the other, out to the building line? We talked about whether it could be a single-family home, or even if it were one long row of townhomes, one could face the street and still look like a presentation to Westminster of a single-family home. So I think, at least if you've got the site plan, you've got it right here.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it. So, to my mind, it's not only consistent with what was done prior to 2016 as it related to the overall vision of this plan, the walkability, the connectivity. The drawings are more developed, but from as is the purview of this commission, the use of space, the density of the space is consistent with one exception, which is the city negotiated up to 14 units and we're down to 7. So I still think there's a concern about massing, though. So let's talk about those issues in 2 respects. Even in that initial discussion where we talked about, could it be a long row of townhomes? Could it be 2 separate buildings with a greater density at one end and lower density towards Westminster? I think the vision was that front-facing Westminster was going to be more consistent with a single-family home. Not exactly, but more consistent. So I don't want to get into HBC's arena. I think from a density perspective, it's consistent with what we approved. I am a little concerned about the bulk. So I think there's probably work to be done there, but I think that our direction to HPC can speak to that. The other thing, again, not getting into HBC's purview, Peter, but I think we've talked about this from the very beginning, and I think there's some inconsistency in your drawings as to what the unit at the southernmost point of 715 is going to look like. The drawing, you showed us a color drawing here that had French doors, it looked like, up above on the 3rd unit, and there was a lot of, different architectural interest. Again, not our area, but from a planning standpoint, that frontage was important to the Plan Commission. So I would just again say, as we send this off to HPC, that's consistent with my recollection of the first night we started talking about this project back in 2016. So I don't, it's not necessarily an answer, I just want to make sure that you understand that remains, I think, of concern to us. I don't really want you to tell me how you would change it. I think that's for HPC, but I want to raise it as a question. I haven't been out I walked the site extensively, but I haven't been out there in the last couple of weeks. Any success on grounding those wires, that run, it's not really so much your property as it is 333, as I recall. Any success on getting those grounded or just to help with this alleyway?
We haven't. What we did is, we took everything from our site underground, so we haven't been able to, they aren't on our property.
Right.
So they're on the 333 property, and they really, because nobody really looks directly out at them from their units, it's not that consistent. So, no, I mean, I think, the only other piece of that is that on the other side where the church side is, we have it there, and there's a temporary pole at the corner of the library. I don't know if that's going to come down, and then we move further south. So we've buried everything between those two. No, we haven't had any success on that.
All right, and if you move the drive to be more of not quite a 90-degree angle, but coming off of the alleyway just south of Westminster into the northernmost portion of that building, you're going to lose, obviously, you'll have a slightly different presentation from a green space, but will you lose these 2 parking spaces?
We didn't. I mean, we kept them the same because the radius of the curve does that. I mean, our thoughts on that and how to hide that is that there's a hedgerow around a front yard that you can really bury that from the streetscape perspective. The problem that you have, the problem though, when you drive east on Westminster, you're going to see that drive opening for there. But we could still have those 2 parking spaces there. I think we really
You
need to
need them? I mean, it sounds
I
like you...
kind of don't think we need them,
Yeah.
and I think it'd be a lot better if we didn't have them. I think it would make that alleyway better. It would make the sidewalk better, so I would opt to eliminate those parking spaces because I do think they're problematic, and it looks like you're parking in the front yard.
Yeah, because I do think,
I mean,
again,
I
limiting
agree.
ourselves to the purview of this commission, I think, although as opposed to a row of townhomes with garages out in front of them and all of that, having the underground parking is kind of an elegant solution to that problem, and I think it makes the site more walkable, and that's consistent with everything of all of the objectives that we set out. But I don't know that I would have anticipated that you would have 7 units of parking all pulling out onto Westminster in that way. So, and I think the elevation issue is.
Yeah, I think we're looking at it was brought up to us in discussions with the 333 people about looking at it, and they would rather have it out there, which kind of makes sense. It's away from the thing. But, so we wanted to look at it in a real objective way and see really what the better solution is. Because I can see problems, I can understand how neighbors be more upset that the traffic's coming out in Westminster. Is it, to have an underground garage in a single-family house is not that unique. I mean, if you look at the other building, the garage is detached, and it's, so I don't know if I have a huge problem about that.
Yeah, but it's not 5 feet.
It's not
lower.
5 feet
Right.
down. And I absolutely think that eliminating those 2 surface parking areas gives you more green space in that area. Turning it 90 degrees maybe opens it up a little bit. And it probably makes sense to go back to that. And I think if we, make the building a little bit smaller, gives us a little bit more, we're down to feet. I mean,
Right.
But a couple feet make a big difference. I mean, in terms of making the turning radius and all that. So I
Well,
think
to that point, that even if you did the curve off of the alleyway as opposed to Westminster, you'd still have the benefit of the lower end slope of the
right.
lot, and you wouldn't have to try and go 8 feet deep
no
in the
question
middle.
about it. We still get the benefit of where it is.
Right.
Yeah, and it gives us the run to make this slope down. So I'm not.
So
I
a
think
question
it's
for you, Kathy, on that, is that, whose purview is it then to speak to that issue? That's a plan commission issue, not an HBC issue, no? I mean, where
As far
the
as the design of
location of the parking and the design, I mean, it's kind of like the overall site plan.
It is, I think certainly some input from you, but it is a design issue.
Okay.
And often the Historic Preservation Commission will weigh in on driveway locations or configuration. So from a finesse of the design, I think it's HPC, but certainly it's appropriate for you to provide your thoughts as well as guidance to the HPC.
Okay. Thank you, both. I pass.
Commissioner Moorhead, would you like to put some fresh eyes on this?
Sure. My first question is an easy one. There's been some reference to Phase 4 in prior hearings, maybe one time in this hearing. I just have a dumb question as to what is Phase 4 referring to?
Originally, we had thought that there would be the parcel to the north, we would build that as a Phase 4.
Okay.
And really, in the reality of it, we've combined the 3 and 4 together, which I think it's the only way we can do it. The site's just too tight
Right.
and to do it that way.
Okay. Some of my questions have already been answered, but I'll just go through the ones that haven't. For the alley, so the existing alley, when the re-subdivision occurs, it's going to be vacated.
Correct.
And then you touched on this, but are you going to put down access easements then for the properties on McKinley, or how is that going to be handled? that
Yeah, so we'll
access?
do that through, there'll be public easements on that alley for not only the 333 building, but for the general public, just like there are on the north, on the east-west street, there's public access alley for that.
Okay.
It'll be maintained by the association.
Okay.
That's one of the advantages of this, of the open spaces are going to be maintained by the associations, not by the city.
Right. Okay. And then the parking, the access to the garage, the actual opening into the garage, is it possible to locate that in the alley, on the, I would say, adjoining the alley on the west side of the building, of either building?
We looked at that early on. Like, if we were not to connect the buildings, like, you could have a one-story piece. It's actually a one-story terrace, and it'd have a garage door at grade, and you'd open it up, and there'd be a ramp down inside that. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Or a ramp down from the alley? I'm not an engineer at all, or an architect.
Okay. I guess what I'd say is we looked at it, at putting the garage door at grade on the street, so it looked like a garage door you drive into. It'd open it up and there'd be a ramp to come down. The problem with that is just increases the mass between the two buildings. So now you have a one-story piece that really connects the two together, and it's just more volume that we're building that doesn't have any benefit other than you're enclosing a ramp. So we didn't really see a real benefit for that. We'd have less mass on the site if we would drive down a ramp and then go into the building, because we're basically covering that space of the ramp with that. I don't know if that makes sense to you. But
Yeah, so is there any way to do an outside ramp into the space off of the alley instead of off?
But in that original, in what I showed in the schematics, that's what we thought. We thought we'd drive down in between the two buildings.
Yes.
So you go down a half, and then you turn right into one side, turn left into the other side. The problem with that is what it does is really, it takes more space in there to do that, so that pushes the building closer to the street.
Right.
By a pretty significant, so it would basically line up then with, as we're looking at this, with a face of the one-story, or I mean, the single-family house on the 3-3. So it would pull it out. We thought it was a benefit to use that space instead of, the space between the two buildings is kind of a, is that a sign? Is there something I should do or something we should do? I'm not sure what that means, but, or I should stop. We thought it was better to push the building back as far as we could get it off Westminster, because we thought that impact when you drive down from the corner going east makes the most sense, to get it back. So that's why we moved the ramp out into the front yard like you'd have in a single-family house. So that was the rationale, because the space that requires to go down, turn both ways, pushes that out.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, I know I'm hammering this point, but there's no way to put the garage on the west side of either of those buildings. My understanding is the underground garage is for both buildings.
Correct.
It's one garage. And there's not a way to put the garage door opening on the west side with an outside ramp?
No, there isn't really enough space to do that
Okay.
within the width of the existing properties.
Okay. Then, I think this might be obvious, but the footprint of this proposed Phase 3 development is larger than the footprint of what was the prior building, the Historical
Correct.
Society.
Correct.
A lot of discussion's been on the three sides, but on the east side, there hasn't been a lot of discussion. I'm wondering if you've taken into any consideration drainage issues, and have you
Sure.
thought of any proactive remediation steps?
Yeah,
Might take?
no, and we've, worked pretty hard in terms of providing drainage in the interim construction site, that sort of thing.
Right.
And basically, we have, in the 15 feet space between the property line and the building, we have 15 feet of space to create a swale and drainage that's going to go all along that. It's going to pick up any water that's along there and take it out to the street to Westminster. So we've had preliminary discussions with the civil engineer on it when the overall master plan was done, and actually as it's going through. But I think that's something that we'll want to, when we go to the HPC, have a preliminary drainage plan done. As long as we all say, okay, yeah, this is kind of what we're having, then have that engineering done in case there was some impact or something that they said impact the footprint or the size because, we had to have swale, something that we don't see. So I don't see any, I see a benefit when we go to the HPC is to have the drainage plan and then we come back to the final review that we'd have that preliminary engineering done.
Okay, so it's an option you're willing to consider?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's a necessary thing that we need to do, for sure.
Okay.
We don't see any issues with it in solving it
Okay.
and doing what it is, yeah.
We talked about the space between the two buildings. Then Kathy, I just have a question. This is, might be a dumb question, but in looking at the zoning code, and I looked at the online code, not the paper code, section 159.07, which deals with the GR3 zone, it allows for single-family and two-family dwellings. And I know our application or our packet says it allows for planned multi-family developments as well. I think you explained it to me at one point, but I forgot. But could you just reiterate or explain again?
When the city council determined that this area should be looked at comprehensively, they approved a plan for a planned development. So the code does provide for planned developments to essentially share some of the density. The office parcels and this parcel, I think at one point when we're having the cultural corridor discussion, we acknowledged there could be probably 35 or so units.
Okay.
So because this is a planned development, not unlike a planned preservation subdivision that the commission often looks at and looks at the whole property, but spreads density around or configures it differently. So this is zone GR3, but all of the GR properties, all of the office properties can be looked at comprehensively as a single development, and a special planned unit development plat can be approved, and those are usually done in phases.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Commissioner Atkinson.
Kathy, I just have a few more questions to follow up on what Monica talked about. So I was on the HPC back in 2016 when we were talking about this parcel. Unfortunately, I was not at the meeting when they approved demolition of the Historical Society building, and I definitely would have voted no, but that's not a surprise. Anyway, so, but when we were following up on that, what we were told on the HPC, that the replacement structure was going to be a single-family home, and that's what was proposed there. So that's where I kind of left it, where, okay, we're going to have a single-family home here, maybe some green space. We had talked about the cultural corridor once the Historical Society left, but we still thought there was going to be some green space to offer buffer to the neighbors. Then fast forward, and I see that in 2016, we have this master plan, and you still have like nothing on that north lot along Westminster, and then you have a building on the back. So my first question is, so city council was the one that approved this master plan, right?
The Plan Commission discussed it, held public hearings, and made a recommendation.
Okay, so during that process, you took public input about this,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And so, was there a discussion about keeping green space, being adamant about keeping the green space, or keeping a single-family home? Because that hasn't even been mentioned here about the possibility of a single-family home up here.
Well, I think I mentioned it. It was, if you look at the plat, it's not that it isn't mentioned, it says right there, single-family duplex. And so there was a lot of discussion about what that would look like, and would the city do it on its own, or could it be incorporated, as I discussed earlier, into a full line of townhomes, and have the end townhome unit face Westminster, like you see some townhomes that look like single-family homes. That was all discussed.
So you talked about the compatibility with the Westminster neighborhood?
Absolutely.
And you
All in
talked about the
December.
need for green space and buffers between the...
Yes.
So.
And what changed was that when it came back to us from the city, there were 9 parking spaces that were given to the library, which resulted in a property swap. So the green space originally had been orientated in more of kind of a north-south, and then it flipped to this east-west. And so, but the general shape of the building to the south in Phase 3 is, it used to extend 2/3 of the way into what's now shown as green space, and it aligned with kind of the north end of the 723, 727 building. So the site plan as approved, there was no box on the site plan for the single-family home or duplex.
Right.
So there was no box, but there was a description that that's what was intended, and that's what city council approved, and that's what city council negotiated for, and we were not party, nor should we be, nor has it been disclosed to us what that means. But the city's expectation when it came back to us was that that would be developed, that it would be part of this overall development, and then that it could hold significantly more units than are proposed here.
But see, that seems like such a big jump to go from single-family and green space to like 2 big buildings right up against the neighbors. And I'm just wondering if there was a compatibility discussion somewhere along the line. Did you take input from the neighborhood about what would be compatible in their neighborhood here? It just seems like such a big change.
We did. It was meant to be transitional. So if you look at other developments in the area, you know, you go from this higher density to a lower density to a single-family density. That's not unusual. And when you consider the downtown area, the train station, that kind of a transitional approach to it is precisely what we discussed.
So Kathy, what would you say to that? I mean, I'm just interested in hearing your perspective.
The master plan in your packet dated December 2016 shows Phase 3. At that time, and I know this has been said, the north parcel was not yet part of any purchase sale agreement. So the master plan acknowledged that that north parcel could be developed under the current zoning with a duplex or a single-family home. So that lot could have been sold off to anybody, and someone could have come in and built a duplex on the property. Certainly, as part of discussion of that master plan, in fact, included in your packet are the redevelopment recommendations. And those speak a lot to the transitional nature that was expected for the Phase 3. So absolutely, consideration of compatibility with the neighborhood. The Plan Commission held public hearings. At the time that was approved, there wasn't a specific plan, but it's identified as a transitional area, identified as part of the larger whole, and identified for multifamily in up to 2 buildings.
And I would just add to what Commissioner Freeman said, the real change in the open space came with the changes to Phase 2, Building 2, because Building 2 was smaller and it did not stretch as far to the east. Therefore, the open space area was more broadly defined initially towards the east. With the annexation of the property from the church, the footprint for the Phase 2 building expanded, and pushed more with the parking ramp as well into our open space. And that's when the open space, per the request of the commission, moved to the eastern boundary of this Phase 3 area, and that pushed Building 3 towards the north.
I know, it's all like these incremental changes that just kept getting bigger and bigger. We went from this master plan, potentially single-family home, large green space, and the buildings are bigger than what the master plan has stipulated. So it just seems to me that there's so much density here, and you're really putting a burden, I think, on the neighborhood in terms of compatibility and density. And I just wondered how much, input you were getting from the neighborhood in this process, because it just seems like, if I was the neighbor here, I would be upset, because it just seems like it's such a big change to my neighborhood. And they were incremental changes that everything just kept blowing up. So anyways, I guess I should talk to Peter and ask you a question is, it's interesting to have these two petitions together when I'm talking about 770 Washington, because as you walk this whole block, within the last year, there has been monumental change in this area. Where you once had a historic block that was dominated by more historic buildings like the library and the church, and then you had views to the train station and Market Square. Now you have the potential for this whole block to be dominated by new construction. And all I see are these big, huge buildings here. So for the neighborhood surrounding here, you were asking for a big change in character and also in density. And as Kathy and I were standing there looking at this, there's cars whipping in and out of there, and I had to get out of the way many times to avoid the cars. So there's more traffic than you could anticipate, and the buildings are bigger, and there's no green space. So I'm just wondering, when you were looking at this, studying this, did you ever consider possibly putting a single-family home with green space in that northern lot? Was that part of, did you ever consider that option?
I think, sure, I mean,
Did
we
you?
can consider, we didn't think we could afford or to buy it in the beginning. So, no, I mean, I would take a little bit of offense to what you say, because there was really substandard office buildings in this space. If you take
I'm not-
pictures
I'm
of
not saying that. I
So,
don't
I mean,
mean
I just,
offense at all.
I mean, you're picturing it, and I would say today this is much better. I think, we work with the church to make it better so that we don't have a single-family house really out of place. We spent a year doing that. We spent, a lot of time with this. So, years doing this. So that's the one thing. The other thing is, so we didn't think we'd ever get to Westminster. It didn't make any sense for us to do that. So we didn't really consider it in the early stages. We thought, when we bought this property, we only bought 2 parcels. We thought we were going to build 1 building and be done. It didn't make any sense. It makes sense to do it all cohesively. And when we came to the end of it, it makes sense that it all be one development and all be part of the same. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. I mean, we spent a lot of time looking at all these parcels, and should the drive be on this side? Should it be on the east side? Should it be toward the north end? Should it be on the south end? We have all the studies that went through and did that. So in literally years, doing it. So I think that we've thought about it. Could it be a single-family house? Sure, it could be a single-family house. Does it make sense that we have another single-family house for sale when you have 4 new lots right around the corner, plus lots of other houses for sale? Doesn't make a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense to us to build things that people actually want in the town, which is single-family living that we're doing. So I think by providing a different kind of housing for this, it really makes Lake Forest a better place.
Well, I guess I'm more concerned about the impact on the neighbors.
No,
So,
and I
did you talk
get
to the
get that.
neighbors?
I mean,
Did
I
you
think
get their input?
I think absolutely. We had been, we had discussed trying to integrate it into the neighborhood, looking about how we could do it in different ways. We spent months trying to do that. We had some doors shut on us, which I understand.
Athens, and I might be able to clarify, the city actually made a determination and went to the developer and said, we have this orphan parcel on the north that has always been a bit of I can't tell you how many calls I used to receive when the Historical Society building was there. People would say, what's going on with that parcel? And when the city realized that this development was proceeding in a series of phases, it really made sense to think about this as part of a whole. I mean, that's what good long-term planning is about. So the city actually approached the developers and said, and pushed pretty hard, said, we want you to incorporate this as part of the development. Obviously, the sale hasn't closed, the property hasn't transferred because it was contingent on being able to get some approval. So certainly the city could not sell that property and we could have that orphan property, but it is zoned for a single-family home or a duplex. So it certainly could be developed that way. But I wanted to clarify that the city council actually directed that we pursue with the developer the opportunity to enter into a purchase-sale agreement for that property.
Okay, so I'm taking there wasn't much neighbor input on that.
How many hearings did we have? How many public hearings did we
I
have?
think it was
that's
about
incredibly
5.
unfair.
I think
And
it goes
think
back to 2011, actually, when you
So I
started
think
talking
it's
about
also
the.
unfair to say there's no green space when we made great efforts to try and have this kind of mirror image of markets, the same size as Market Square. So I think we just should be factual.
Yes, and we're asking
And that's why I'm
questions at
asking
this
questions, just to
point.
try and
Right.
get the facts.
So-
Because I've been in and out of this all along, and it goes from, you know,
Right, but I
a
think
single
I think
family
it's
and green
important to
space
remember-
to
Why don't we
two big
finish the
buildings.
question
So
phase,
anyways, I'm just trying to
and then
get
we
some
will get input
clarification on
from
how
the
this
public,
happened.
And then
Yeah.
have a discussion among the commission members.
Okay, so the other thing I wanted to get some clarification is we got this letter from the Donovans about 1:30 this afternoon, and I haven't really had time to really dive into it, but I was just wondering if, Kathy, if you could address some of the issues that he brought up on here, because there's quite a few, and I'm just wondering if you can just address some of these, particularly the first three, maybe.
Sure, I'll pull that up. I don't have that in front of me. I'm working to pull it up, but maybe just mention the issues and I can respond as I'm pulling it up here.
Okay. Okay, while we continually to rapidly contemplate the impacts of this project and shared staff report, we look forward to your help clarifying responses to the questions detailed below. What is the purpose of lot consolidation and the corresponding legal requirements to proceed?
The purpose of lot consolidation, right now there are 2 parcels there. As you heard, the intention is for Phase 3 to be in a single ownership. So consolidating the parcels is really a way to deal with the ownership. There were multiple properties as part of Phase 1. There was also consolidation done there. So it's really, it's cleanup to allow an ownership of the particular model that's desired. And that would really happen, I mean, you have to deal with the site plan and the transition and any variances that might be required. First, the plat of consolidation is just procedural.
Okay, it says, doesn't the code stipulate that only one building be allowed on a consolidated lot?
It does not.
Okay, isn't the proposed building number 4 massing more than double that allowed by zoning?
If we were not looking at this as a whole, again, the council identified this as a planned development. If we were just selling off the front lots separately, yes, the city's building scale ordinance would apply. It does not apply in multifamily developments, did not apply at the Laurel Avenue development, because it's a planned development, it's consolidated, it's intended to have, incorporate multiple properties and multiple phases.
Okay. Is the joining of the 2 buildings via balcony and parking garage somehow tied into this consolidation strategy?
Again, it's just ownership. At least as currently envisioned, the Phase 3 property will be held in a single ownership. As was explained, there will be different homeowners associations for each of the phases, and then there will be essentially a master association.
Okay. Have the full applications of code been followed in this instance for the proposed consolidation?
The consolidation, again, is really a procedural matter. We would have to file a plat, we would have to record a plat, and lots can be consolidated.
Okay, I'm not going to keep going on with this, but there are quite a few questions here, and so I don't know how, I guess you can do it in the public forum, address them with the neighbors stepping up, because I'm taking time for that, but just another question. So the purchase agreement is not finalized, right? The city has not transferred ownership.
Transaction has not occurred, the property has not been transferred. Essentially, essentially, the petitioners are contract purchasers.
Okay. Okay, okay. I'll wait till later, ask some more.
Okay. Mr. Whitmer, I have just some specific questions. I agree with Monica's comment that I don't believe we'd want that outdoor space for that unit pushing into the green space. But I'm a little unclear as to the levels that each of these terraces are on, thinking in particular about the property to the east. You have one that's an interior space that you said is on the lower level. You have one that shows outside of the building. Is that also at the lower level?
Let me,
This is the 715 building?
the 715 building, yeah, let me
Right.
just,
I don't know if I have the latest version. We've received several.
all right, let me just make sure we're going on. Okay. All right, so, just going on in terms of the outside spaces, so this is, a 3-level, with the upper floor being a terrace and then 2 outside spaces on the west side.
So that's all 3 levels?
This is all 3 levels.
Okay.
This is, we were proposing this to be at grade. So you'd step down and so that terrace would be at grade. Back here, the indentation would be at the first and second floor level, but not at the third floor level. This terrace, what we're showing right here on this outside, would be just at the first floor level.
Okay, and there are mature trees to the east
The-
and
the-
a 6-foot fence?
Correct,
Okay.
yeah.
Thinking of privacy concerns of the neighbors.
Right, yeah. And I think, you know, when we go to the HPC, we'll also bring a final landscape plan. We'll really have Mariana go through and think about what makes sense in terms of, you know, evergreen versus deciduous, how existing trees are and their locations and all that, so we get more specific about providing trees in the area.
Now my questions are on the property that fronts on Westminster. And my general question is how it fits in with the streetscape of Westminster. So we've got sort of some competing interest here. How it fits in with Westminster, but then how it fits in with the other buildings in the McKinley redevelopment. And I would be interested to see your responses to Commissioner Douglas's specific detailing, which is beyond my capacity. But you now have a construction fence up. How far back is that from the street?
That is, I believe it's pretty much in line with the face of the existing building to the west.
It's stepped back a little bit from
Is
that.
it back a little bit? But that, I mean, it,
So that your building,
But-
you're suggesting would be even further
Further
back the
beyond-
construction
correct,
fence that
yeah.
we see now?
yeah.
Okay. Do you know the setback for the Donovan's home, which sets back significantly from the street?
87?
I want to say around 80,
84?
80, yeah, it's like 80 feet.
And it looks like the properties to the north of Westminster are significantly closer to the street.
Correct.
Do we have a range? You give a range of 40 feet to 80. Yeah. Okay. So if you're going back towards the south, even further back than where the construction fence is now, I see you've got a step back between, well, among these three properties, so that the property that's attached to 333, the white clapboard, is closest to the street. Then your proposed building here steps back from there, and then the Donovan's property would step back even more. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Originally, we had expected that the ramp would be contained within the McKinley Road area. I hear your points on just the narrowness of the parcel and such. And you've mentioned that the ramp will be built at the lowest point, but what, again, is the decline, if I can, not the incline, but the decline from the street to the building and the garage?
In the garage. In the current configuration, from right here, it goes down approximately 5 feet.
Okay, I thought
So,
that's what I
so
heard.
from here, it's down 5 feet. From over,
Fencing there, as you have it, and the
That-
ramp,
I thought there is to do with landscape as opposed, because I think it would look better to hide it with landscape than it would be with fencing. I mean, we could have an iron fence on it, but basically to have a hedgerow. If you come up to the corner here, so the drop from here to come around is more like 8 feet to go around. And again, our thought is to enclose the front yard in a hedgerow to hide the ramp.
I would ask HPC to take a close look at just the bulk of that property that's going to be on Westminster, and the detailing, any ways you can reduce the appearance. Would this be the same brick that you've used in phases 1 and 2?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up an interesting point, and sort of, we have a lot of people actually come to us and say, why did you save this building? Why did you save the single family
I've
house
asked
when you
Kathy
did?"
that several times.
Yeah, and it's, and it's, well, for one, it's a terrific house. I mean, it's a terrific little house. There's no question about that. And it really does hide the mass of this building behind it when you turn and you come up, when you're going west on Westminster, integrate that. So, and we, because it was clapboard and we built a different building, it's really different. We were concerned about this, and we thought it made a lot of sense to have a brick building as opposed, a brick residential house is what we're trying to look like, as opposed to a clapboard house. It's really different. So that when you came down the street, it obviously related to the two in material, but it changed in terms of shape. So our thoughts were not to have it as clapboard or not to have it as that, but to have the same as brick. And a brick house on the street, I mean, Donovan's house is brick, the house over here is brick. So, it fits within the streetscape of it and kind of works on both ways. I mean, our idea is to make this thing look like a single family house. That's what we're, sort of all in the same goal of that process. So that's where we are in the current design and the current thought process on that.
And your entrance on this 361 building would be fronting on Westminster? How would you work
I think
that?
right now we have the front door is coming off of the alley in this. So you come into the front door on this. I think if we eliminate these two parking spaces, we should have stairs up to the front porch for the front unit. So it looks like that's the front door to the house, just like it is in this building, just like it is in a lot of, when you have the front porch that you come up. So it would correct that issue. Because I think it would look better if we had a set of stairs going up to the porch. It look like that would be your front door. for that unit.
Just overall, I'm wondering how it fits in with Westminster at that point. And that's probably more for HPC, but I want to bring it up.
I think it's, we're getting there. I don't think we're there yet. I mean, I think that we're working toward it, and there's a lot of good solutions that are coming out of this thing, and we will continually work on it, so we're comfortable with it. But I do think the relationship of this building and the rest of the complex ought to be stronger than oh, this is the building left over and we tad it on than this one. I think we can do that.
And it's definitely at least 20 feet for your alley.
Yeah, 20
Your
feet,
drive.
right.
I would just suggest that when this comes back, you could put, as Mr. Stratoff did for Scott, you put all of the setbacks, the height, everything on one sheet, because
I
I've
can
had
do
to go
it.
to
It's a lot
about
of-
4 or 5.
Yeah, I
and then-
know, and we
quite a
started
bit
with
of
that because I
time.
put it on each individual slide and then you get it, and
Yeah.
it's a lot of information on one, but yeah, we're happy to do that. And
I think for our reviewing purposes, it's easier to have it on one.
Okay.
And in the minutes that we just approved earlier, there were at least 3 commissioners that requested more thorough drawings. So. Do commissioners have any other questions for the petitioner or staff?
I have a question on setback then. So if the front door is facing west, wouldn't that mean that you need a backyard setback of more than 15 feet?
The front yard is defined by the code as the portion of the lot with the narrowest street frontage, which is on Westminster. So regardless of where the door is.
Any other questions for petitioner or staff? All right, then we will move to the public testimony. Particularly given our tornado interruption, we ask that each speaker not exceed 5 minutes. There will be a timer that goes off at that point. And if you feel you're being repetitious of other comments, you can simply refer to the earlier speaker, but we do ask for public comment. First speaker is Steve Hurst, 485 East Westminster.
And Chairman, while he's coming to the podium, I just wanted to mention, I believe there's also some people in the audience who perhaps didn't have a chance to
Right.
submit forms.
Yes, so if anyone else wants to speak, please fill out one of these notices, and then we can swear the second group in all at once. Mr. Hurst?
Thank you for convening this meeting this evening. There was a get-together last night of a group of neighbors that live east of the property. In hopes of keeping the discussion brief tonight, all of the thoughts and concerns at that meeting were incorporated into a page-and-a-half-long letter that I believe Kathy was good enough to put into your packet. And to preserve time tonight, I thought I'd just read it into the record because I think it'll help focus the discussion. Would that be okay?
Yes, thank you.
It has come to our attention that the Plan Commission intends to take action at a meeting this evening to approve Phase 3 of the McKinley project. We are writing to request that you not rush to a vote. We have a number of concerns that have not yet been addressed. Here are just a few. Drainage. Water runoff from the McKinley project presents a problem that is not limited to the immediate neighbors. Drainage along Westminster has been problematic for years. The city has done some work on Westminster east of Walnut, but it's not clear that this work addresses the additional water that will be coming our way from the McKinley project. The direct neighbors are benefiting from a recently designed swale, but this is a temporary solution to a larger issue that affects every home on Westminster between McKinley and Sheridan. More information is needed. Streetscape. Many of us have improved our own properties and have provided considerably more detail than has the developer here. At a minimum, the city should require the developer to provide a landscape plan to show the neighbors to the east how their property will be screened, particularly in winter months when the existing trees lose their leaves. It's also not at all clear that the proposed building materials, design, roof lines, etc. are complementary to the existing neighborhood, which is an historic district where a higher standard of review applies. Building height and massing. From the materials we have seen so far, it appears that the proposed project may be over the bulk limit. Is this correct? If so, then that needs to be clearly stated. Also, the height. At the last Plan Commission meeting, at least one commissioner member suggested that the building be limited to 2 stories. This newest plan does not reflect that request. We are also concerned that the city appears to be vacating the existing alley in favor of the developer. Is this correct? If so, what impact does this have on the mass of these two buildings? Who owns what? It's not clear to us that the developer currently owns the property abutting Westminster. Is this parcel still owned by the city? Green space. What started as a residential development within the cultural corridor with ample green space is now just a plan for 3 large-scale condominium buildings and 1 very large duplex structure with 5,000 square foot floor plans for each unit. Green space has diminished at every design iteration. The original walking connection between the library appears no longer to be relevant, whereas increasing the mass of buildings 2 and 3 has become paramount. As currently proposed, there is not enough green space to break up the massing. Traffic. Currently, there are 10 homes within the island that's encompassed by McKinley, Westminster, Walnut, and Deer Path, plus a condominium on the corner of McKinley and Westminster, which we believe contains 7 units. If we assume each house has 2 cars, then we have 20 cars, and add another 12 to 14 if you include the condominium. If the Plan Commission approves both the Swift and the McKinley projects as currently proposed, we project that the number of cars in the island will triple. Please note that Walnut is a very narrow street with a hazardous hidden stop sign. The city should look at the impact that these additional cars will have on Walnut and also on traffic crossing the tracks on Westminster, where westbound Westminster drivers have the right-of-way over northbound and southbound traffic on Western Avenue. Traffic patterns between 3 and 5 p.m. when schools are out and commuters are returning by work and by train and by car are of particular concern. We are not opposed to development, but we feel compelled to object in this instance where the scope of the 2016 project has shifted and where publication of the developer's plans has been limited to a narrow range of residences. Many of us do not live within the standard radius for notification according to the city, yet all of us are impacted. For a project of this scope and scale located at the intersection between downtown business corridor and the east side of the historic district, we believe the public interest would be served by greater transparency and more time to consider the impact this proposed next phase of development will have. The developer should provide a clear summary of the variances being requested and written responses to the concerns outlined above. These proposed variances and other responses should be presented at a neighborhood meeting so that the community can have an opportunity to provide informed comment for the commission to consider at a later date. Again, that's a summary of a collection of concerns by a large number of people. I believe 16 people have signed this letter so far. I would just add, from my own standpoint, living downhill from Westminster, drainage is an issue. We hope there will be some consideration given to that. I honestly don't know if this project exceeds the bulk limits. I'd be interested in having an answer to that question. I think that's within the purview of this group. And, excuse me. Finally, the traffic is a concern. As was noted earlier, there's a lot happening right now at the same time. With the Swift project, this project, nobody thought it would happen this way, but the impact on the roadway usage could be profound, and I think more study on that would be appropriate. I was listening to Peter's comments earlier. It looks like we're going to have 78 parking spaces in this project alone if it proceeds as proposed. That's something that I hope that will be given further thought. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Should we hold off on answering any of the comments for now and just continue with the public testimony? Because we do have some answers to some of the issues you've raised. John Hirschberger, please, from 333 East Westminster.
Hi. I would say that one of the things, I'm on the board for 3 through 3 as well. One of the things that I'm hearing a lot from our neighbors is concern about the traffic in the alley. The building, the new building directly south of us, I guess the original plan for the traffic pattern would be to come out, turn right again. We see, some of that traffic as well as comes out of the alley right by our ramp. My unit looks out directly over the duplex. So actually one of my bedroom windows is directly going to be line of sight to it. So obviously I have a lot of interest in what that's going to look like. But I think that there's a lot of concerns about the traffic in the alley. Making it a little wider will certainly mitigate that, but pushing a lot of additional traffic I think would be really problematic. I think most of our neighbors believe that as well. There's also concerns about traffic overall. For us coming out of our alley onto Westminster can be sometimes perilous and a lot more traffic. Obviously, it's going to make it a lot worse. Another concern, I think it's addressed in this plan that's been, was communicated to me by some of my neighbors today, was the height of the duplex. Obviously, the sight line, as presented today looks pretty good, but I think generally people would not want that to be, have to look up to a building. And would echo the comments about a desire for more green space as opposed to less. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Lardino, 351 East Westminster.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, neighbors, friends. Appreciate being here. Like I said, we live in the small little 351 house there. Certainly are glad it's still there. We have a lot of day-to-day concerns in addition to things that have been noted in from the meeting from last night. We weren't able to attend, but we did sign the letter. We've got 2 small children, 6 and 8. It was about 2 years, I think, the development of the first project, number 1. It's been noisy, dirty, trash in our yard, workers throwing stuff, wooden stakes into the snow in our yard, like something you would stab a vampire with. I mean, it's day to day. We power wash our house, 2 days later it's filthy. Wash your windows, it's dirty. Spending a ton of money on the house. Sinkhole in our driveway, just developed. Couple $1,000 to get that finished. Is that a drainage issue, something new? Potentially, maybe not, I don't know, I'm not an engineer. Looking out, we bought this house 4 or 5 years ago, quiet neighborhood, small single-family house leading down to the lake. It's changing. We're not even gonna be able to look out the side window and see anything. I mean, it's just frustrating. Like I said, I mean, pardon my emotion, but that's what my wife and my children feel. It's the neighborhood that we bought into our life savings to live here for better schools. Things are changing, and not for the better. Like I said, a lot of other smaller concerns too, but those are some of the primary things that I wanted to express. Like I said, there's a lot of things day to day, not just the macro, but the micro that are affecting us. So, thank you all.
Jeff Terosian, 401 East Westminster.
Thank you, Commissioner. Jeff Terosian, we're at 401 East Westminster, which is just 2 doors east of the proposed duplex. First of all, we sign on to that letter. My wife was at that meeting last night. Some neighbors got, I think, over a dozen signatures in a few hours with people at work, so that shows you how up in arms the community is. There could be several dozen more within a short period of time as this keeps moving forward. We share the concerns Commissioner Douglas said in his written comments wholeheartedly. We believe this is a classic case of project creep. I can tell you I've been through all the minutes, all the videos, all the comments, and Commissioner Athison, you are 100% right on. Everything you've said about project creep is right smack dead on. And so please don't give up. We're all counting on you and the other commissioners as well. I know they haven't shared their comments yet, but we think this is project creep and it's gotten out of hand. The neighborhood has come to various meetings, has watched and participated, and part of what project creep does is some people might be in favor of the office buildings being torn down. Some people might be in favor of a new residential condominium building going up. You are not in favor of the height of phase 2. We shared your concerns, but that got away from everybody. And the buildings are tall. Phase 3, it looks like something's going there. Phase 4, which it used to be called, and now we've conflated it into phase 3, which is part of the project creep, has not been determined what that would be. It could have been open space. It was, the only minutes show that that should be considered as part of this process, but what that would be was still limited to single family or duplex. And now we are showing a duplex. I could tell you in the last meeting, Commissioner Ruggles, you asked the question, where is the ramp go for the parking? And the ramp for the parking in Scheme C at the last meeting in June was between the two buildings. And Commissioner, you asked tonight, isn't that possible? Or I don't know if it was Commissioner Moorhead or you, but one of you asked, is that still possible? Why is it now on Westminster? And you were brushed off, it's not possible. Well, it was on the scheme last meeting. And now it's on Westminster. And that is a significant change to a historic district to have a concrete wall with a drive-in for parking to go not just for the proposed duplex, but for the entire condominium development that's phase 3 and phase 4. That was never contemplated. That has never been approved. That has never been discussed. What is now in phase 4, and I continue to call it phase 4 because it is phase 4, is not a duplex. That is a condominium building with 2 units. That is different than a duplex. It now has parking, not for a duplex, but an entranceway and parking for an entire 2 condominium buildings, the duplex and the one to the south. That is not what the master plan said was supposed to be here. It was supposed to be a single family or a duplex. That proposal is building on almost 100% of the site, that is phase 4, and the only distinction between the 2 buildings is a little breezeway in between, which was not contemplated. You asked again about combining these 2 parcels. That's the project creep. They don't need to be combined. That was supposed to be a duplex or a single family and not a contiguous small separation between 2 condo buildings. Commissioner Ruggles, you also asked at the June meeting about the footprint, and you said the footprint for phase 4 was too big. And what you got in response, which is a project creep, was an answer tonight that it's the same footprint, they just moved it slightly so that now they could put the driveway on Westminster instead of down the alley. That's the same footprint that you objected to last meeting, and the developer has not addressed that issue. The community is against this proposal. We're not against development. We're not against all of the things that have been done in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, but we are against this proposal wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sally Downey, 475 East Westminster.
Hi, thank you very much for letting me speak. Let me start with addressing Mr. Hurst, who read the letter. Kathy had asked me to at least give you some addresses of people who signed off on it. It's 485 East Westminster, 338 East Westminster.
Could you go a little more slowly, please?
Yes, sorry. 485, 338, 373, 461, 360, 401, 420 Walnut, 441 East Westminster, 475 East Westminster, 351 East Westminster, 441 East Westminster again, and 500 East Westminster. That was done in about a 2-hour period of time. And some people were away at work, so we are expecting more. Some of my neighbors have already addressed some of the concerns I have, but I would say one thing is that Kathy started this before the tornado warning with the idea of talking about a holistic look at this area. And I buy that. I think that's what was being looked at. However, at that same time, there wasn't the Swift property as well, and that was brought up earlier. And I think it's really important to look at it in terms of this island. This is a little historic island that has a library that may be going through some future changes based off of their need. We've got the Swift property that last meeting was talked about at 4 lots. And then there was discussion amongst yourselves about pocket housing or cluster housing. People have different words for it. I was watching on TV, and the idea that we could talk about anything from 4 to 8 houses was just another example of not really understanding what was discussion and what is a plan. And there's the creep. Because just listening to you, ma'am, about the idea of being on the historic board and hearing it one way and coming on this board, it has incrementally changed this project. And I didn't really have any idea what was going on until March, because there are a whole lot of us impacted that are not within the notification zone of the city. That's a city issue. Kathy was nice enough to add me, but also to add other people. We have had to be the advocates for this. So yes, there's been disclosure, but it is such a tiny radius. And today, walking around, having to explain to people who had no clue what I was talking about, and all we are living east of Walnut Road. We're not in the radius of the conversation, and yet we're impacted by traffic, we're impacted by drainage, and we're impacted by the current development. None of us were against this development per se, but this creep and this feel that this has gotten bigger, and that the conversations have been happening with the church and the city, the library and the city and the developer about what to do with the Westminster lot, and actually the developer and 333 building, which I have heard through a couple sources that that's the reason it got moved, the driveway, is because they didn't want it in the inside area. So then I learn, in the few months that I've known anything about this, that there was also at one point discussion of not just using the north property on Westminster, but that there was also a look at the Donovan's property of even extending the development. So as we unpeel this onion, you find out more and more. I don't know what is real. I don't know what has just been discussions, but what I do know is we're kicking the ball and these buildings are getting built. I believe Building 2 is going to go up and Building 3. So what do we have control of? We have control of Westminster. The city owns it. The city owns it. You do not have to put anything on there. The idea that it could be a single-family home or duplex, okay, let it. Let us, as the neighbors, make that decision. I like these developers. I saw their work. It's quality, but I built a house in Westminster, and I wasn't able to say, I think, it may, we'll get to it, we'll give you plans. I had to put in 80% of my plans. I was not allowed to put a garage attached to my house and face the front because I was told it was not what the rest of the neighbors had. I had to do a garage behind my house because I'm in the historic district. There have to be standards for everybody that are somewhat equal. the Altunian family has invested a lot in our town. So this isn't a personal thing. This is, I live in a community where there was this neighborhood, built a house there, played by the rules. Now we've got different rules, they keep changing, and I'm so afraid it's gonna go to the historic district, and then it's gonna come back to you, and there are gonna be more changes, and you've got two fairly new people sitting on this commission. It's hard to keep up with all these changes. I have never read so much material. I still don't understand all of it. So I ask you to take your time. We're all asking you to take your time. I spoke with Mr. Altunian today, and he said that they would be willing to meet with the neighbors. These are not just the neighbors who are within the notification, but those who are impacted by that. And I think that's a reasonable ask at this point. We don't have to develop Westminster. I don't know if it makes or breaks their project. I don't think so. They're willing to cut back on square footage. They're willing to cut back on parking. If they're willing to do that, then there's probably a way we can get a driveway not going into Westminster, and maybe there's a way to keep that green space. And I think we should look at that as an option. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick Corsilio? Patrick, were you sworn in before?
No.
Okay. Patrick and Mr. Donovan, you were sworn in previously. Okay. So, Mr. Corsilio, do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
Please continue.
I wasn't intending to speak, but given the tenor of comments, I thought I might just say a couple things. I currently reside at 418 East Illinois Road, but I've purchased a unit in the 723, 725 building, and I am the president of the Condominium Association. And first, I'd like to say just I have a good deal of sympathy for the two most immediate neighbors dealing with construction issues. That's not fun. This is a prolonged construction project. But the main thing I want to say is to sort of echo what Peter said. There's 12 or 13 couples that live in this building, and we all love living there. I don't live there quite yet, but I will in another month or so. And this complex of 3 or 4 buildings has allowed these are all Lake Forest residents who, I believe, all of us have a second residence in another state. We're all older, our kids are gone, and it's single floor living. We pull our car under the building, we get out the elevator, we go up to our building, we can live there for a long time. We all walk to Caputo's, we walk to Starbucks, we walk to Fresh Market to buy our groceries, walk to Jewel, walk to Walgreens. I mean, this is obviously it's given in size, it can't serve every resident in this community, but to have the ability to live as a lifelong Lake Forest resident, maintain my relationships and not move downtown in Chicago or completely leave the state, this is a huge benefit to a not insignificant portion of this community. So I recognize it's a change, and that's up to you guys to decide what setbacks are and everything else. But when you think about how to proceed on this, I would urge you to not make changes that are so profound that the development of the building in the rear doesn't proceed. And I would also urge you to think, from the perspective of the residents there, having that large green space in the southeast corner is a huge benefit to us. And I think other residents of the town who want to walk down there and come out from the library and sit there and have a sandwich. So there's, there's two sides of that density question. So that's all I really had to say.
Thank you. Doug Donovan, 373 East Westminster.
Thank you, Lake Forest Plan Commission and Community Community Development Team for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Doug Donovan. My family and I have been residents, co-parents, and active community business leaders and volunteers for the last 24 years. My partner in this process and journey is sitting with me tonight in the audience, Mary, my wife, and we currently reside at 373 East Westminster. This morning I received a communication copy of the staff report in response to requests for clarity on tonight's McKinley proposal. Since then, I believe the online staff report has been edited. We've been scrambling to make ready for tonight's meeting. I appreciate the communications from our neighbors. Majority echo everything that we have been voicing on this topic. But I have to say, I'm going to say right now, I'm sorry that I have not had sufficient time to be as thorough or polished as one might hope. So I'm sitting here reading from notes I was madly typing when my wife got home from work before we scrambled over here. So please bear with me. Contrastingly, according to, I think you call it the consolidation plat in the online materials, the petitioner's application is dated that it was submitted 7 days ago. So that makes tonight's agenda item for vote and action on a very significant community impact a very impressive service of turnaround for the petitioner, but not necessarily the resident stakeholders. I'm informed you have a copy of my email question, as we've talked a little bit tonight, as provided today, after having viewed the shared staff report. I'm further advised you have, this has been made part of the official record, so I'll be as brief as I can, laying out my concerns. We've collaboratively engaged this process since 2016, and we've done our best to follow the storyline through City Council, Plan Commission, HPC, BRB, personally funded legal engineering teams for us to meet with the city and the developer, and associated member transitions of those volunteers that so generously volunteer their times to these processes. I get it, I appreciate it, it's hard. But lack of patience with the progress, I don't think is a reason to say it's enough. To date, those engineering communications that we've been trying to have with the city remain unanswered and incomplete. They've been addressed, but they've not been closed. This is a very different animal from what was presented in the 2016 master plan. It's unclear to me about what was or wasn't comprehended in this master plan and the lot directly adjacent to us at 373. I know that throughout this process, we asked the city why we couldn't buy it and annex it as part of our property and preserve our green space. But we were told that was not a favorable position for the city, so it's been very closed door. So I don't know what defines that. I don't know if this, our neighborhood, might want the neighborhood green space. I don't think green space is as big an issue here tonight as a purchase price, but maybe I'm naive. Maybe I don't understand the long-term tax implications, but I certainly not sure I understand the consistency of some of the testimony I've heard tonight. This appears to be a major adjustment without clarity and dialogue to the master plan implications that I think the community as a whole deserves for this decision process. As a result, we have no real choice other than to object to the items being put forth in this meeting for consideration. It's hasty and defies what seems like process. Briefly, our questions as proposed. Apologies to my neighbors for drawing my time, but in the past I've referenced those as part of the record. I don't feel like that's been enough, so I feel obligated to read them. I'm going to do the best I can. We started with them. What's the purpose of lot consolidation? You know, I heard, I'm not an attorney, But I heard the city's answer is that this did follow process, that's somehow part of a planned development, that somehow accepts these bulkage variances as part of a conglomeration of all the properties there. I would have to beg to differ. I look back to every minute in 2016. I know the conversation and the dialogue, I heard a point tonight, they've rotated around that, but no minute has ever said that this is a master plan, that therefore, I don't believe, to my understanding, makes this codified or makes this a position that's ready to move forward. If it were, I would think that that consolidation would at least require an amendment for tonight's conversation about consolidation. I asked that the building number 4 massing wasn't more than double the zoning. I think we heard that answer not answered tonight by it wasn't applicable. That's how I heard it. I think that deserves more and better, clearer discussion. Is the joining of the two buildings in the diagrams via balcony and parking somehow tied into the consolidation strategy? We glossed over that tonight. We talked about, I don't know why there's a balcony combining them, but I still beg to differ with the merger of the properties. Have the full applications of code been followed in this instance for the proposed consolidation? I've heard tonight that answer is yes. That seems less clear to me. I would ask you to think more about that question. There's a process to follow when we ask for these kinds of consolidations and amendments, and I'm not aware that process has been followed. Is this request made simply to give the petitioner setback relief for the two Phase 3 and 4 buildings as proposed as a completion of the master plan strategy? We don't know what the terms of sale are. I wonder if the terms of sale are contingent upon these variances that are being spoken of tonight to make this deal real. So I think we should be talking about what are the zoning variances, what are the exceptions we're asking for, what are the non-exceptions that we don't feel have to be applied for. I heard tonight that these are not exceptions. Again, I would ask you to reconsider that. I did ask earlier how this was, the petitioner was labeled as the architect and developer. I was informed that, in fact, this is a city. So I guess I have to wonder, how can a lot be vacated? How can it be absorbed into the density of this proposal to the benefit of the petitioner when it's actually the city that is proposing this? This is the city's proposal tonight. It's not clear to me that this process has given the neighbors to the other side. Do they know that somehow half that alley is not theirs? I just don't know. When we spoke in the driveway, I don't think we knew, and it still remains unanswered. So if Lake Forest is still the owner, how can the city proceed without a conflict where its apparent contractual interest will be affected by whatever zoning relief is decided to give itself? How is the alleyway immediately west of the phase through fully included as part of, I'm sorry, I'm repetitious. Why is the massing of Building 3 allowed continuously to shift north and bring greater impact to the Westminster streetscape and neighbors? I sat here very engaged in the September meeting when this plan was proposed. The cultural corridor was spoken of in July, and that this was being acquired as a group. And we proposed it in September. And in that preferred plan in September, the foundation of building number 3 was aligned with the foundation of the historic Mason building that's since been torn down. Ever since then, as we're reminded, there was creep on that foundation of what a preferred plan was approved in December. But the common language was preferred plan, not a revision document that went from board to board. I wonder why the height of the building number 4 is not called out as a variance to zoning. It seems that it exceeds the zoning height by over 3 feet, almost 4 feet, which is exacerbated by the lot elevation in relation to our home on Westminster immediately east and the streetscape. Why would a Westminster streetscape setback variance be recommended for a structure that's not in harmony with both neighbors? The construction to date has created a recognized drainage impact, is partially addressed by the recent swale we've spoken of. And I heard tonight that the developer does not see any issues going forward resolving those issues, or resolving that drainage. I have not experienced that. We have not experienced that to date. We've only experienced improvement because we had to hire an engineer. Aside from the legal process questions of code and zoning and this behemoth structure that's beside us and being proposed in what was a green space, this is boiled down to a very real and painful quality of life impact for our family. The noise, the surprises, the dirt, the scrambling, the drainage, the lack of privacy have been relentless, and they seem unbalanced. What's next? I'm not sure. Seems like we're going to be in a shadow of this large building now. Less natural light, but perhaps more artificial light. The traffic intrusions, I don't think we understand those. I wonder how the traffic study of something that, I beg to differ, addressed this plan still somehow applies. These items don't reflect the quality of life that led us to invest and engage in this community and raise our families, many of them together, over the last 24 years. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public? Have you previously been sworn in?
No, I have not.
And state your name, please.
Reed Daly.
Do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you're about to give or have previously given is true and correct to your best knowledge?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hey, so I live in 385. My fence keeps on knocking down from construction and trash. It's gonna get worse. Like, this is a really tactical thing, but I'm guessing. I'm right next to the zone, or sorry, Plan 3. My guess is that trees are gonna come down and fence will come down and I'll get more trash as I did after building number 1. What do I do as a recourse, as just an individual, like, to address that?
You should contact Kathy Cerniak,
Okay.
Community Development.
And in terms of like trees, I don't know the species of trees. Like in the winter, it's dead. I mean, I'm gonna have very large buildings bumping up against my property. I mean, do I have any recourse in asking about trees being placed in there or foliage? It's if we're thinking about distance, right? Like my house to your wall is roughly how far away that will be. It's going to be tight. So now I'm going to have a 2-story or 3. I'm confused. I heard 2 and now I'm seeing 3. So that's going to bump up. And so I'll have NFL Monday Night Football in the 60-inch of my neighbors. Because I can see it now in building 1. And hey, man, they got high def. It's fantastic. I'm saving a fortune on DirecTV. But, is there any sort of saying, hey, you're going to build this big thing, just do me a favor and plant some trees that, kind of pay it forward a little bit? Is that something I can file a petition for? I don't know. I'm new to the community, new to owning a house, so all new stuff for me.
Well, as has been stated, that HPC, with its review, would receive a full landscaping plan. If you have questions about your trees, I'm not sure how available the city arborist would be, or one of the local landscapers.
Want me to respond now or in total to?
We can respond in total, but, there are some answers to your questions.
Okay, and then my last question. So I just look at the green space, and so I've spent half my life living in houses and the other half in condos. Where does someone walk their dog and go? Because that's a pretty small green space for, a lot of units and a lot of folks. And I get that not everyone's going to be outside at the same time, but where does that happen if there's going to be HVAC behind the phase 3 and phase 4? And then, we're kind of moving to a service-oriented community. I got Amazon trucks coming to my house. Where do they park and come in and out. I mean, I got Amazon coming 2-3 times a day, and I'm 1-2 people. We got, 30 new people. Where's all this traffic gonna come from in addition to where are they gonna park and do all that work? Those are just more comments and questions more than anything. But Kathy, I'll connect with you on my subscription of HDA or NFL Network and Trees. Thanks.
Any other members of the public who would care to speak? Yes. All right, now, is there anyone else who also might want to speak so we can swear you in together? Because we are getting tight on time and we have another item on the agenda.
I'll make mine really quick.
And I'm sorry, but your name, please.
Jenny Bilski?
Jenny?
Correct.
And your last name?
Bilski, Bilski.
Jenny, do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Hi. I live at 403 East Westminster, right next to Reed. And I grew up in Vernon Hills. I've always known about Lake Forest, was really excited to move here. Never in a million years would I have thought the historic district, what we moved to, would be creeping in with condos and possibly gone. I have a vision of, well, another 10 years, another condo, we need more people downtown, we need more people to support the businesses. I get it, it's a great place to live, but think twice about what you're doing. You're destroying the historic district. And then the other thing that I just want to reiterate that everybody has said, we haven't really focused on the height of the second or third building, the longer one. That's 3 stories. That is going to dwarf all the other houses around it. It's huge. It's way too big for the area. You need to keep that in perspective. It looks like a roof, but it's a 3rd story. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Then the public testimony period is now closed. And final questions are requested from the commission to petitioner or staff. Kathy, do you want to give staff response to some of these comments now or hold it off till later for your?
I'm happy to try and speak to some questions about drainage kind of in the bigger area. The city recently had, very recently, like within the last week or two, an overall drainage study for the community updated to help the city council really identify which areas of the city are priorities for infrastructure upgrades. So the council is focused. They do know the rains are heavier. They do know storm sewers are something we need to look at. They'll be looking at that as part of their capital planning. So I do think it's a bigger issue. Certainly the drainage for this particular site for phase 3, as it was done for phase 1, phase 2, the city engineer reviews detailed engineering plans, provides comments, the plans are modified, additional information is provided. His review is done consistent with the Lake County Stormwater policy, the Watershed Development Ordinance, which we are bound to enforce. So there's the drainage on the immediate property that is being looked at, but council is having larger drainage discussions as well. As you talked about earlier, this project, if you find it to be generally consistent with the master plan, it would be appropriate to refer it to the Historic Preservation Commission. Yes, the buildings are changing. They are not at 80% drawings. That wouldn't be normally done at this level because the design aspects, architectural detailing, materials, massing, roof forms, those are under the purview of the Historic Preservation Commission. So it is a little bit of a chicken and an egg until we have a general sense that this is consistent with the master plan. To send it to the Historic Preservation Commission may be premature. But certainly that's where we would get more detail. They would look at hardscape and landscaping as well. They routinely look at screening for neighboring properties. So those are details, as well as any exterior lighting. Those are details that would be addressed by the Building Review Board. Yes, there was a question about the alley. The city owns the alley running from Westminster south. It used to, you used to be able to wind through there in a bit of a dangerous way to the back of the library parking lot. The city owns that alley. That alley will be vacated. Just as we've done with the new east-west road that was put in, there is a public access easement that is established and recorded over that. There would be a public access easement recorded over the alley, but the city would no longer be responsible for any maintenance. That alley, as some of you may recall, was in pretty bad condition those last years when the Historical Society was there. So that will become the responsibility of the condominium association. Once we know the mass, the form, the height of the building, we will then be able to enumerate any variances, if any are required, whether they're setbacks, whether a height variance is not a zoning issue. That would also be considered by the Historic Preservation Commission. So once we get those more detailed plans, if this moves forward to the Historic Preservation Commission, we would be able to enumerate what, if any, variances are required. I certainly heard some discussion about the setback variances and whether that's appropriate or not. There were questions about whether the building scale ordinance applies to this project, and it does not. Just like it does not apply to multifamily buildings in the Laurel Western Avenue development, it does not apply to commercial development. The building scale ordinance is designed to apply specifically to single-family homes that are on individual lots, not part of an overall planned development. Are there other particular items that you wrote down that you'd like me to respond to?
You've mentioned the landscaping. The streetscape questions? Including the ramp.
I think that the location of the ramp, certainly this, the number of parking spaces proposed exceeds those that are required. This development of this area was envisioned as being a walkable development, and I think you heard a little bit of that. So the location of the ramp, is that a design discussion? Is it a planning discussion? I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's certainly appropriate for the Plan Commission to weigh in on it, and if this moves forward to the HPC, to ask them to deliberate on it, to look at how it would fit in with the streetscape, to look at how that the ramp down would appear on the streetscape. So I think that is a design issue, but certainly appropriate for the Plan Commission to weigh in on.
The traffic, because early on in the process, I recall petitioner did have a traffic study done, which showed that the traffic from this residential development would be significantly less than what was being generated by the two existing office buildings, the historical property, and the fact that it was a cut-through from Westminster down to the library.
There was a traffic study required. It was reviewed by the city engineer and confirmed to be appropriately prepared. Executive summary was provided to the Plan Commission, and yes, you are correct. The study concluded that the amount of traffic that could be generated either by the three office buildings that were existing prior to this development, or to any, if those buildings were demolished and a new office building and parking garages were constructed. Certainly residential traffic generates less peak hour traffic than office. In this case, the number of units proposed are less than were anticipated and less than would be allowed on the overall site by the current zoning.
Do you know when that study was done?
I don't, but I can certainly get you the date.
And do you know who, you might have said it, but who did the study? Was it the city or the?
The petitioner was required to have the study done.
Okay.
The city engineer reviewed the study and verified appropriate calculations. But yes, petitioners are required to perform those studies.
Okay, and in those studies, is it typical to take into account delivery trucks like Amazon or others?
Yes.
It is.
And certainly, those numbers are moving. I think in some studies, we're having a discussion about Route 60 corridor right now, and there's some, as we look forward, there are some who would take the position that there will be reduced auto traffic because of, so some of that amount of deliveries, how traffic patterns will change, some of that is difficult to forecast, but yes, there are standard numbers that are factored in for delivery trucks. The study, as I recall, assumed development of this site, this overall site, with 30 units.
Okay. May I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Just to clarify, and I could look this up, but in the GR3 zone, the underlying zone, not assuming there's no planned development, it would allow for a single family or duplex improvement there.
Correct.
And in the O1 zone, which is what, which is the zone on the McKinley properties, that would allow for multifamily.
Correct, office or multifamily.
Multifamily, okay.
Can I ask?
Please, it's,
Okay. So, Kathy, for what was parcel 4, lot 4, if that would be developed as a single-family home or a duplex, it would have to adhere to the GR3, correct?
Correct.
So those setbacks would be like 40-yard front, 6 feet side yards, 35-foot rear yard?
Correct.
And then if the property, lot 3, would that also be GR3?
Yes, both of those properties are GR3.
So then if 3 and 4 are split from each other as separate parcels, and if lot 4 is developed as a single-family development, not as a combined unit, which is being presented now, lot number 3, would the front yard be considered, since it's kind of like a flag lot, what would the front yard of that be?
Of the parcel 3, I'll call it.
Or the 715 building?
The front yard for that is the west side, because that has frontage on a street.
Okay.
Whether it's a public street or a private street, the front yard is defined by frontage on a street.
So then if I do the math on that, then the separation between those two potential buildings would be a 41-foot distance. Because you'd have the rear yard of the 361 building having to be the 35 feet from the property line, and the 6 foot for the side yard of the 715 building. And the reason I'm bringing this up is the master plan, basically, and we were under the assumption that was going to be a single family or a duplex. So just in my mind, I always thought, okay, it's a footprint of one house and you've got yard around it like everybody else's single-family house has, right? So those would be the setbacks that you would kind of be stuck with. So I think the concern and what I'm trying to get at is, like, since they're kind of consolidating, lot 3 and 4, now you're not getting that separation between what you would have had for the Lot, 4 and Lot 3. Now, we have 15 feet between the buildings, when we could have had perhaps the 41 feet and that green space that's associated with that. Is that, for the setbacks?
And the difficulty with that parcel is it really is a remnant parcel. The Historical Society building used to be associated with the house that's to the southeast of it. So the city's ownership is this narrow parcel that, you're correct, doesn't lend itself to development under, if it had no association with this. And I think that, in part, because of the unique configuration and because it doesn't lend itself to development, is why the city council looked at this and thought there's probably more value, more benefit, perhaps the ability to achieve, with an appropriate transition, a better, a more aesthetically pleasing development than if we have this narrow parcel. That was some of the thinking that occurred.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for petitioner or staff? Any additional staff response to the public testimony?
Nothing further.
All right, well, now it's time for commission discussion and comment. And this period is part of an open meeting. However, the comments are confined to commission members.
Chairman, normally there's an opportunity for response from the petitioner to public testimony. If
he declines.
Thank you, I have a 6 a.m. flight, appreciate that.
Commission discussion and comment. I would like, well, a couple of things. One thing we're being asked to consider here as Plan Commission is how much does this plan that is in front of us today adhere to the requirements set for a master plan? And this is more of a big picture. We're getting to some specifics, but not the specificity that HPC would have. Before then, it would come back to us again, would it not? Yes. So the plan does provide open space, which was a key requirement on the part of the city and commission. It does include underground parking for the entire site, which was a requirement set by the commission. It is residential, which provides a higher density population to the city center, as someone noted, to support business. And one of our goals with the environmental commissions is to have more walkability. So it does, I believe, meet that. However, they're doing it with fewer units, which I think to a certain extent would address some of the concerns of the neighbors, because you have fewer residents using fewer cars for fewer trips. It does include some patios and outdoor spaces. And traffic, per the petitioner's information that was given some time ago, but it did show less trip traffic with the residential buildings than what was incurred by having the office buildings and the cut through to the library. Commissioners, I would like each of you to state whether you're in agreement on any of these items, whether there are ones you want to add, or any other comments you might have. Commissioner Freeman.
Thank you. So as I kind of tried to indicate a little bit before public comments so that I get the benefit of those answers, I do think, and I would ask that, Kathy, that this original site plan that was approved in December of 2016 be made part of tonight's record. And if you wouldn't mind us borrowing your copy, Chair, I'd like to just publish it to the rest of the commissioners as a reminder of what the site plan actually was 3 years ago by the time we get to the end of this process, so that we're all operating off the same facts. I mean,
It's included.
is it on there? I didn't see
The
it.
original conceptual master
So
plan.
what page
I
is that?
put,
How come I didn't see?
It's the very, it's
It's part of the
the
packet.
second 11 by 17 sheet.
I
which
pulled out a
packet?
separate plan
There's two
because
of
I
them.
wanted to more directly compare the sizes of
Yeah.
the buildings.
It's this one.
Page one,
Oh, this
page
one.
two.
Off of this side, and before the development one. All right, well, and then, so it is part of the record. I mean, my recollection of this is clear. I've been with this project, and I take umbrage with comments that somehow we were not considerate of all the considerations when we reviewed this originally. This was a unique opportunity for the city to develop this area. I think we've heard, I mean, the idea to me that that parcel that sat empty, that could have been developed as a single-family home or a duplex, is so attractive in that format that it sat there for decades. And the fact that we've heard from a neighbor tonight that the new and better use of the property is in fact what's been proposed, and I think the sales reflect that. And ideas to try and go around that by, and we have to remember that 715 was pushed in a northerly direction at our request to create green space. So if we want to say adhere strictly to the setbacks, that building can come back under the setbacks. I mean, this was a negotiation. This was consideration that was given over a number of public meetings. There was a great deal of discussion among the commissioners as to what to do with this. And let's not lose sight of the fact that after we approved this site plan, which I would challenge anyone to compare it to what is here on 715 today, and tell me that there's been project creep. There has not. And just the description of a duplex or single-family home remains exactly as it was in December of 16 when we sent this to City Council. And we have to remember that it's not just the petitioner. You know, what happens after the Plan Commission does something like that is parties then go out and contract, and they make business decisions, and the city made a decision on behalf of all residents, and who we represent, all residents, to contract to sell that parcel because of the way in which the plan came together. It met the requirements of those that came before us, and we respected those requirements, and we acted on them, and then the city then acted by entering into a transaction based on that. To come back now 3 years later and prejudice those parties, including the residents of this city as a whole, to my view, is a disservice to the people. You started by talking about service, and those of us that are here serve of our own time. We have no vested interest in this other than to do the right thing by the entire city. And I just think it's inappropriate to demean that service in the comments that have been made, to dismiss it, to mischaracterize it, and then prejudice parties that contracted based on it. I find it very troubling, I really do. So to be specific to your points, Chair, what I would say is that we're not taking formal action today. What we're saying is, you know, is this plan consistent with the plan that was approved in 2016? And that's why I just want to pay careful attention to the way those buildings are described. And if we're going to push 361 forward or sideways or back, then 715, out of respect to, and deference to the parties who relied on our representations, then I think we have problems with the green space. And I really like the idea of the green space. I really like the idea that as the library continues to evolve, and you look at what the north end of that library building looks like, and what we envisioned, and I will say it far less eloquently than my predecessor, Guy Berg, who was here today and used to sit in this chair. You know, picture, you know, the front end of the library, that green space is so beautiful, but it's a slope, you know? So picture the back end of the library being more open without that north annex, and people being able to utilize that green space and have a walkable space between this entire corridor, which is exactly what we had hoped to envision as a community corridor. It's now a residential corridor more than a, you know, because of just the nature of the buildings. But I think there's some factual there's a bit of a memory gap here on what was there. I mean, those buildings were awful. And what's going up now, you don't get to go back 2 years later and say, well, now that we have these two beautiful buildings that these parties invested in and relied upon the Plan Commission's site plan to build, now let's change the third part. No, that's not fair to the people, including the city and its residents, who set this out in the first place. We set out a plan. This, to my view, is consistent with what we did back in December of 16. I think the party should be allowed to rely on those kinds of representations and not expose the city to risk by years later changing that. So I don't think there's no question as to the first item that it is in fact consistent. And then it should go to HPC to look at some of these other issues that we talked about. You've got, you mentioned the driveway. I mean, I tend to agree. I certainly didn't envision a driveway on Westminster that served 7 residences. I most definitely envisioned there being 7 residences. The expectation at that time was as many as 14. So you keep pushing these lines around and there'll be 0. And I'd like a park next to my house if the city wouldn't mind buying my neighbor's property, but I'm not entitled to it. And so I think, again, we set out a plan. We have to measure against that plan. So I would direct that the site plan be presented to the HBC, that they focus on the placement of that driveway more so off the alleyway or north-south street rather than Westminster, that they focus on the architectural detail of the south end of Building 715, as we talked about. And then the petitioner, after meeting with them and the Housing Trust Board, and the other items that the staff recommends, should come back to the Plan Commission for final approval, and, you know, we'll have another open hearing, public hearing, and then it goes to City Council. That would be what I would envision based on where we are in this process.
Comments from other commissioners?
Okay, so well, being on this project from the start, you know, Plan Commission, I do recall most of the meetings, and I believe part of the master plan is being adhered to. I mean, I think that what we saw in, you know, phase 1 is matching the master plan. Where it started deviating was phase 2, when there was the land swap between the library. So in phase 2, their proposed building actually got larger. And because it got larger, the green open space became a little bit smaller towards the west. And as we worked through that land swap, it was determined that we would extend that green space across the back parcels of, you know, Lot 3. And yes, I agree with Michael, that did make the multifamily building like phase 3 a little bit shorter. It's definitely shorter, a little bit smaller, but building 2 got bigger in the process. The footprint of building 2 is bigger. And then I believe we also thought that, you know, building 3 would be a 2-story type of building. So I'm not really concerned with the footprint of it. I'm more concerned with the bulk of building 3. And then where I also think the master plan and this project deviate is parcel 4. I strongly felt that the imagery that we were thinking was going to be more of a detached, single-family or duplex type of thing, not something that's really an interconnected building with the parking garages below it. I'm not saying that it can't happen, but I think that's a deviation from the master plan. So if this is going to move forward to HBC, I strongly recommend that they look at the size of the duplex and its compatibility with the neighborhood in scale and footprint.
So may I ask 2 questions on that? So would you propose then that building 715, the 715 McKinley building, would 6 units be acceptable to you there as opposed to 7? Is that what you're saying? A 2-story, doing away with the 3rd-story unit? Is that what, I mean, what are we saying? What would be acceptable in your mind as it relates to?
Well, I'm not really looking at the unit count. I'm looking at the bulk of the building, because the petitioners are saying there's a 6,000 square foot unit on the 3rd floor of it. So, I mean, they could easily have made that into 3 units.
Well, that's why I'm asking,
So
is
it's-
it the stories or is it the number of units? Just
It's
to
the
give some
stories,
direction.
the stories.
So it should be a 2-story building.
And it may be 2.5, but I think the 3-story mass is something that came as a surprise from our earlier discussions. I think the terminus of Building 2, where it ends at that road, yeah, maybe that's 2.5, 3 or so, but I always had the impression of the townhouses were going to be a 2-story type thing as a transition to the eastern residential areas.
We were talking about a spire or some other focal point at the end of that east-west road that might give compatibility with the scale of buildings 1 and 2, but then it would be slightly less in height going down to the property on the east.
So something of architectural interest, because we had talked about the idea that it would be a 2-story, but maybe a gabled roof as opposed to the flat roof. There was a lot of that. And I agree on 361 on the bulk, and Peter and I talked about that. I mean, I think the idea of 3,500 square foot living spaces is not what you envision in a duplex. So, but I have to say, the parking situation is a creative use of the space. So the idea of being able to, I don't like the idea of a 5-foot drop out at the frontage here facing Westminster, but the idea of bringing it around and tying these together instead of having garages or taking up something away from the green space. I mean, I thought that was a fairly clever way of dealing with it. So just want to make sure that as we send this to HBC,
Right.
what are your, how do you see getting it to 2 or 2.5? And is it 6 or 7? Is it, what is it?
Again, it's not unit count, it's really bulk, and the master plan for building number 3, the 715 building, the driveway was located just north of that. So like if we would look at this petition, it seems like they could do it from the middle of their
Well, but
their
remember when it was
project.
first north of there, it was not 2/3 of the way, it was
Right.
2/3 of the way into the green space when that drive was there. So once you push that in, that's what I'm trying to give HBC some direction. Because I think from Plan Commission standpoint, we should be thinking about the overall way the site looks, right? I mean, they have to look at the architecture and I think it's, the more direction we can give them, the better chance we have of getting an approval when they come back to us. And
Right.
I don't mean to, I'm not challenging your views, I'm just trying to understand.
No, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I understand, but I do think when it goes to HBC, as many other HBC projects, like if you have a driveway at the front, a garage facing forward, normally that's frowned upon. So it would be nice to give some direction, like in maybe HBC, it's like try to look at something that's coming in from the middle of the site where you're taking, this automobile traffic away from. The street is a public view. All of us get to see that. Nobody really wants to see the cars come in and out of this multifamily unit. I think my direction to HBC would be, most importantly, is look at the duplex and the bulk and density of that unit.
Great.
I would
And the
agree.
architecture, the style of it is definitely not as developed as the other buildings in detailing.
And then placement of the drive, not on Westminster, but on the north-south street, and preferably, if can be arranged without compromising the open space, in between the buildings as opposed to where it is proposed at the northerly point of
Right. Where it
361.
shows
Yeah,
in the 2016 plan.
that's gonna be some
Which will,
magic.
I think, require the single-family duplex property to have less bulk and perhaps fit in better with Westminster. And because it would be part of the PUD, you may not have a 35-foot backyard, but you would have some green space and adequate landscaping.
Right, and your arc that goes into your duplex. Because you could still share the one driveway down, and then they would arc off to either side.
So can I ask, because I just think this green space idea and the idea of having a space as large as Market Square, mirroring it on the other side of the train station, looking to the future of the library, is really important to keep that as united as we can. Would you be, I mean, at first I was kind of resistant to having 361 be any closer to Westminster, but, you know, look to the property to the west. I mean, in order to make room for this driveway in between the two, and I think the bulk should be smaller, but let's not kid ourselves. You go from 3,500 down to 2,700 square feet, you're not getting a driveway in there.
Right.
It's not gonna happen. So are we gonna just, you know, force the city to get no revenue off the site and turn it into a park? That's not what we contemplated either. So I think, you know, would we have an openness, and could we, I don't know what that would require, Kathy, but be open to moving 361 closer to Westminster? I mean, I kind of like it being further back and
I do
not out of the
too.
view of the, you know?
Streetscape is
Yeah.
important.
I do too, and that's why I asked that question when you come up. I think it's the setback now at 48 feet is great when you're coming up Westminster from the east going west. It's set back, so you see the Lardino house there at 351 more so than you would see 361 because it's set back. And there's a drawing that we saw here this evening that shows that.
Yeah, that's what I struggle with, is where do you put the drive then? I mean, I understand I think ideally I'd like it to see it between the buildings too, but I'm struggling with how can you come up with a solution for that that still allows, because like I said, the 500, 600, 700 square feet, it's not going to accommodate it. And I don't want to give up the green space. I think it's,
And Michael, I don't think we're going to solve that tonight, but
Right.
I think as Mr. Whitmer said, it can come off to the side. It wouldn't be on Westminster. It would be in that alleyway, although it would be on the northernmost edge of it. But, I think ideally what everybody's saying is to bring it farther south, but then you obviously get into the problem of the 333 ramp there too, and that's probably why they can't come that much farther south.
yeah, you don't want them across. Right.
Well, originally, they weren't across from each other.
Right.
They were staggered. And the idea was that all of the parking and the ingress and egress would be contained within this PUD. I do have some concerns about streetscape, whichever way you do the ramp. And I get concerned about kids in these ramps. I do. And I think if you can do it within the structure of the PUD, it's much less of a public nuisance, shall I say. Kids and skateboards and whatever.
When you say do it within the PUD, you mean do it so it doesn't go and exit onto Westminster?
Well, originally, as Commissioner Ruggles pointed out, it was located between Building 3
Right.
and the as yet undefined area for the single-family duplex lot. We had the lot, but no building on it.
Okay, I agree with that. I don't think the driveway ramp should exit onto Westminster. There's only one other garage on Westminster. I believe it's Lardino property, 351 East Westminster. It's not in keeping with the characteristics of the neighborhood. And then you are channeling 7 units or however many units of traffic, car traffic, onto Westminster. I would be interested in that traffic study to see when it was done and how relevant it still is. Because I just, sometimes, I would be interested to see what that says and see if it needs to be updated at all. But I do think the driveway needs to be located off Westminster onto the property. I mean, quite frankly, maybe I've lived in an urban environment for too long, but I'm surprised that you have an alley adjacent to a property and you're exiting not onto the alley, but onto the street. It just, I mean, it's the purpose of an alley, in my humble opinion. With respect to how to do that, it might tie into the bulk. And I would suggest to the HPC or the city that some consideration should be taken that the properties along McKinley are in the O1 zone, which allows for multifamily by right, and this particular property is in the GR3, which only allows single family and duplex under the zone. I know we're talking about a planned development, but still, the intent was that this would be a less intense use than what is on McKinley. And taking that into consideration would allow for a transition of the intensity from the western properties here on McKinley to this particular phase 3 to the, I think it's the Donovan property to the east.
Is it possible to have the ramp with part of the building over it?
Right, that's what I was getting at. I don't know. I'm not a architect or an engineer, but I would think there could be some creativity to that. I would not be opposed to putting it between the two buildings, how I think it was originally done. But it seems unreasonable to from a safety perspective, to put it on Westminster, from a neighborhood characteristic perspective, and from a traffic perspective. It's unreasonable to ask the neighbors to bear that increased intensity of use.
I guess I would add, looking at this from the beginning, which I think you have to do, the historical aspect of how we got to where we are today. I think it goes all the way back to the 2011, the Cultural Corridor Task Force that was put in place, and the desire was to not have any of the office buildings, or not have any office buildings east of the tracks, and to develop the parcel as one, and not to have 5 or 6 different owners coming through here. I think that, as I understand it, was part of the master redevelopment plan that this commission passed in the fall of 2016, that was presented to and accepted by the city council. I think that it has been in keeping with where it began in 2011. Are there concerns? There sure are concerns. We heard from many of the neighbors here tonight, and those concerns, must be addressed. And from the small nuisance items of garbage in the people's driveways and language we've heard before, those need to be addressed from by the city back to the developers, because that should not and cannot be tolerated. And as for the other real items that consistently came from about the 7 or 8 neighbors that spoke here tonight, those issues also need to be addressed. I think when this goes back to the HPC, everything from the drainage to the streetscape, we're not going to solve that all here tonight, obviously, but we again heard from some of the neighbors on trees and how those trees need to provide cover. All that would be and could be addressed and should be addressed at the HPC. And again, the building height and the masses of these buildings, I think we've all mentioned those as concerns. Those can be and also should be addressed at the HPC, but again, in keeping with what has been presented from this phase 3 back in the original plan of 16. And the traffic study that was done, it's my understanding that was done, as it was stated here in our material, for 30 residences in here. That total number of residences have come down to 26, so you're 4 less there. And I think what really has come out, and we heard from one of the homeowners tonight too, is many of these units are occupied by empty nesters. So they're not going to be there 6 months out of the year. And I think that needs to be thought of and kept into perspective, that for 6 months out of the year, whatever those 6 months are, there's probably going to be nobody living in most of those units. So I think for all those reasons that it should go back to the Historical Preservation Committee, but it certainly should be done pursuant to the items that were raised here and I just outlined, and taken into consideration by the HPC.
Well, and I would also acknowledge it's been very wearing on the neighbors with Phase 1 and now Phase 2 under construction. Phase 3 has been used as the staging area for both of those buildings. It's a narrow site. When we get to Phase 3, how will the construction be staged? That's another question. And hopefully, with minimal impact to the neighbors. I believe the construction fence has helped on that basis, but it can be very wearing. And unfortunately, it's for long-term benefit, there is some pain along the way, and the neighbors do bear the burden there. Any other comments, questions?
I guess
Commissioner
I'm-
Athenson, you've been so quiet.
I'm just listening, taking notes, listening to everyone's opinion. You know, it's funny, I just heard the new city manager speak, and he said the one thing he learned very quickly was how nothing in Lake Forest happens by accident. And I think we all have the same goal, is that we are very, you know, determined to protect our historic neighborhood character. And that doesn't mean no new development, but rather more of a managed development. And this is kind of the messy part of trying to manage these developments to make sure that they're compatible and you know, you don't lose that character. And it just is interesting in this block right now how much change has gone on. And I do think there has been a monumental change in character here. Not necessarily bad, but we just have to know that this block is changing. And it is on the edge of the historic district. So with that in mind, that's where all my comments come from, is, you know, can we preserve or can we have a development that's compatible with this historic neighborhood that we have? And when I look at the master plan, I agree with Monica that it has changed from this original 2016 master plan. The building has gotten larger, things have changed. Most importantly, there's 2 new buildings on these back lots. And this master plan actually looks more workable and keeps everyone, finds a compromise that everyone can live with, I think. What's troubling is when you add, instead of a single-family home or smaller duplex that's more compatible with the neighborhood, it just appears that you're trying to squeeze too much development into this small lot. And that's when it puts more of a burden on the neighborhood. And as you heard from the neighbors, I think they're in agreement with that. So it's not that we don't want new development, but I think it's incrementally grown from this master plan to the point where, you know, I'm just thinking it might be a little bit too much. So, I mean, I'll go over with some of the things that I really agree with, is that the new building as proposed is, as Commissioner Douglas had mentioned, is the scale is not compatible to the homes on Westminster in terms of height and mass. So it would be nicer to see something that looks like a single-family home, smaller, that would fit in with the scale and proportion of those single-family homes. Let's see, what else did I say? So it almost seems like there's so much density here, just so concentrated on here, that it really puts a burden on the neighborhood with increased traffic and reduced air and light and reduced privacy, especially with this new proposed building. And what I see now is that with the new buildings, the building number 1 up and building number 2 starting, you can see that the library, the church, and Market Square are now subordinate to these new buildings. And then I think the whole plan of this master plan was to highlight them and make them dominant. But I don't think we've achieved that. So I think we need to find a solution that both the neighbors and the developer can live with. And of course, I would support, as the master plan kind of dictates and takes you down that road, and what we had heard before in the beginning of this process, a single-family home and some green space that would give you a little bit more privacy buffers, some more airspace, a reduced building 3 to keep that green space back there. And of course, the driveway not coming off of Westminster. I think we've all kind of agreed on that one, that is incompatible with that neighborhood, and it puts too much burden on that neighborhood with traffic. I don't think the building should be more than 2 stories high to be compatible with the existing homes. I think you need to put heavy screening for the east neighbors with evergreen and deciduous trees. I think you should consider a 35-yard setback on the side setback, just to give you a little bit more buffer. Or if you're gonna face a single-family home, then that's more, you can do like a 6-foot, 15-foot setback. Obviously, I would like to see no building on this parcel, this building number 3. I think, you'd have more green space. It would provide more views to the historic buildings. It'd give more privacy to the neighbors. I think I've said that all, but I just think that it's a little bit too dense for right now. And what I really would encourage, Peter, is I think you heard from a lot of neighbors, there's a lot of confusion out there. And I think it would be really beneficial if you had some kind of neighborhood gathering to try and answer all their questions and explain what's been going on, just so you're addressing them, because it's hard to address them in this public meeting like this. And you want something you can all live with. You want to be a good neighbor. So, it's changed a little bit, and I would encourage more communication between the developer and the neighbors. And then I would also ask that if you're doing a duplex or a single-family home look-alike on Westminster, that the building scale variances should apply to that. Because if you don't apply them, it's gonna look out of scale with the rest of the neighborhood there. So I think that's, I'm reading all my
Just your
scribbles.
comment on Building 3, as I look at the 2016 plan and the current plan, while the buildings move north, it's actually shorter than it was originally shown in Building 3.
Yeah, but now you have 2.
Yes, yes.
But you always anticipated to, it says right
Yes,
there, a
right.
single-family home or
Single-family
duplex. I
home or
mean, it
duplex,
doesn't say
right.
park. It doesn't
No,
say park.
but it doesn't mean you can't do that.
You
So-
can at the cost of those that
Economic.
enter into a transaction based on what we approve. And I think that would be irresponsible to put the city in that position.
And then some of the question on whether it should be a 2-story or a 3-story was how Building 3 relates to the existing 2 buildings in the front. You wanted a roof line that was in scale and proportion, but still stepped down, and that's why I think it would be good to get some input from HPC on that.
Well, I just think I'm trying to ensure compatibility and privacy and air and light and views to the historic buildings, so that's how I see it. That's my opinion. I'm just trying to find something that could work for the neighborhood, and, once you have these buildings up, that space is gone. You don't want to put a financial burden or, affect anyone's property values in a detrimental way either. And I feel that, with these bigger buildings going up, you're really going to negatively impact some of the homes surrounding it.
Any other comments or questions, discussion among the commissioners?
I just say I agree with Steve Douglas's points in his written submission.
Well, then the question would be, are we ready to consider a motion?
Maybe it'd be best to take them one at a time, instead of if I could give it a try.
Well, can I just ask the question too, before we start with the motions? Because I am concerned that there are so many open-ended questions here that we don't really, and the neighbors obviously don't really know what we would be approving. And I'm wondering if it's worth continuing this to allow the developer to have meetings with the neighbors to address their questions, to address the questions we've raised, because we are pretty split here, And if it's worth taking one more month just to continue it and address all these open-ended questions, it doesn't seem like this is ready to be approved because there's so many.
It's
We're
not
not,
an
yeah, we're not
approval.
taking action tonight.
Okay, I'm just
Yeah.
thinking it's worth continuing.
No,
It's-
it's gonna be continued 2 months probably, because by the time it gets in front of HPC and then makes its way back to us, so I think I don't think, at least I didn't come into the meeting with an expectation that we were taking formal action, right?
Well, it says
Right.
on the, here, it says, request approval.
So, if I might try, if you want to try and take them one at a time and see if that works. I would make a motion that this matter be forwarded to the HPC for further consideration with the following directions, guidance from the Plan Commission, again, intended in an effort to try and bring this project to a conclusion out of respect for what the neighbors have been going through and the parties for that matter. So the first statement there or direction would be that we, the Plan Commission, endorse the site plan as presented as generally conforming to the approved master plan and the McKinley Road redevelopment recommendations. However, the bulk of Building 361 Westminster is larger than anticipated when the site plan was approved in December of 2016. And initially, I'll just comment here, initially I was thinking about the idea of boxing them in by the, frontage, but I think we need to leave HPC a little more room to think about how to place that driveway if we're gonna try and move that driveway in between the buildings. So I'm
I would
initially
note-
I was gonna make that as part of the motion, so I just throw it out there for consideration. But I don't think it should be part of the motion, because I don't wanna tie their hands. It's gonna be
You don't have to tie
complicated.
their hands, but I think we should make it clear that it's a concern of the commission where that ramp is placed.
Yes, that would be one of the next guidance points, exactly right. But do you wanna take them like one guidance point at a time and have comment on it, and then,
Well,
or should
are
I
you
throw them
saying
all
that
out there?
but you're saying that we generally approve of the
I didn't
site
use the
plan?
word approve, and we're not approving anything tonight.
Did you say support?
Endorse,
Okay, well,
Because it conforms.
conceptually.
Right.
still endorsing.
But let's say.
Yes, it's endorsing, it's not approving, there's a.
Right.
it's a-
So there's a meeting with the HPC in a month, within which time the neighbors can continue to comment. Any ideas brought up in that meeting can also be presented at HPC. And then it would come back to us with HPC's recommendations for another public meeting.
What I slightly worry about is that we don't really want it to go to HPC when perhaps a couple of us are very concerned about the size of 361. Perhaps they need some guidance that, we're endorsing the plan, but there's some strong reservations about the size of 361.
Isn't that what Commissioner Freeman had just
that's
said?
But it didn't seem
Endorse.
strong enough.
Okay.
So
Your
by
verbiage.
endorsing it as generally consistent with the plan, it's 2 stories, so we're all in agreement on that, right?
2.5.
Well, except for one.
And 3.
There's no height that would be acceptable, but the rest seem to be in agreement that 2 stories would be acceptable generally as what was approved in the
Or
plan.
361?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, so then really what's left is bulk, the size of that building, right? And I, in the motion said that the bulk is larger than anticipated when the strategic plan was approved in December of 2016. So you gotta work,
the
but
context,
but
how
how
it
much
fits into the
smaller, is
street
that what
scene.
we're
I
gonna tell
guess,
them?
they could make it 2 feet smaller, and then it would come back, and then we might still say, well, that's still too big. So
What I
just-
heard the commission say is direction to look at 2 or 2.5 stories.
That was for 715. We're talking about
Talking about
361 right
361.
now.
We're just talking about 361 right now.
This is why I was thinking of doing them in little segments, because, it's hard to quantify, and the more you quantify, you're right. Hypothetically, they could do a minimal adjustment, and then it would come back, and we'd have to send it back again. But if we get so granular, they're not gonna be able to do anything, short of taking the open space away, which I think we've made it clear that's not gonna be acceptable. I mean, it's a complicated, you know, when you start shifting the buildings around, which, you know, to make room for what we think is in the betterment of the community, we put a burden on the plan.
Correct, but I sort of see that there was kind of an even trade between phase 2 and phase 3. Like where building 2 got bigger and 715 got a little bit smaller.
Yeah, but you have to remember what happened. The swap of land on the space has already happened. What happened with that was they bought the property from the church, because the church, in trying to make sure that they tried to, you know, be a good neighbor and improve the concept overall. So that's where it got bigger. I mean, let's not, I think it's hard sometimes because we've had so many meetings.
Sure.
But that's what happened. And so, I mean.
And it got bigger to the south, right?
Yeah,
Well,
it
but
got
it
bigger
also-
and off of McKinley,
Yeah,
right?
but it was also more in keeping with the scale and proportion of building 1. So that if.
From a frontage point. yeah.
Right, right. So I think the overall effect for those 2 buildings on McKinley is going to be much better now with the
Completely
larger
agree.
footprint.
But how can we
on
send it to
building 2.
the
Completely agree.
HPC when we don't even have a resolution of these issues? Like,
Because we'd like their input.
Oh, and we've
Yeah.
spent 4 hours talking about this. We need to do something. I mean, we can't
Right,
just,
well,
I mean,
that's why I
the
say
petitioner
continue.
can't go on like this forever, so.
Commissioner Freeman, you suggested breaking these into pieces, so perhaps you asked for a vote on the first piece, endorse the plan as generally conforming to the approved master plan and redevelopment recommendations.
Yeah, but let me see if I can, and I appreciate that, Kathy, but let me see if I can figure out a way to make a friendly amendment to Monica's point before we do that. I mean, I'm just struggling with, it's gotta be more than 2 feet, it's gotta be 500 square feet per unit, it's gotta be, you know, I'm just, I hear what you're saying, and I hope that they'll kinda have the patience to listen through this long hearing to see what we were thinking, but, so I see where you're going, I'm just struggling with how to put that into a recommendation, so maybe help me a little.
And Monica, your concern is you don't want to give HPC that flexibility to look at that and consider that when they look at the streetscaping there? That's your concern? You don't want to?
No, I want them to look at it. I just,
Right, but in
I
terms
want,
of size, you're not, you're concerned that they won't scale it down enough or
Right.
won't scale it?
yeah. I'm concerned that since we're saying that it's generally conforming, that they're going to look at the footprints, go, oh, yeah, okay, it just needs a little bit of tweaking.
Yes.
Where I think that potentially it could use quite a bit of tweaking on the Westminster elevation for that, you know, duplex to, you know, be historical and contextual on Westminster with the rest of the properties.
I agree. Having
Based on-
both been on HPC and PRD.
Based on your discussion, it sounds to me like you're saying it's generally conforming with respect to use, it's residential, generally conforming with respect to its 2 buildings, the master plan contemplated 2 buildings, the general layout. What you're uncomfortable with is the nature of the transition, that the transition does not achieve what you expected. Remember, the Historic Preservation Commission has 17 standards that they are charged with evaluating projects against that speak a lot to compatibility with the district, with the neighborhood, looks at height, massing, architectural details, exterior materials, landscaping, hardscape. So perhaps by putting a finer point on what you're endorsing and then being clear that it sounds to me that the transition, which relates to the bulk, the location of the garage door, the detailing, the materials, that sounds like what you're struggling with. Is that where you're at?
I think that's helpful. So let me withdraw the previous motion and replace it with the following, and I'll warn you in advance that the first sentence is exactly the same, Kathy, so if that helps you. So again, I would move that we endorse the site plan as presented, as it generally conforms to the approved master plan and the McKinley Road redevelopment recommendations. However, the bulk is inconsistent with the transition from multifamily to single-family anticipated by the Plan Commission when the site was approved in December of 2016. More specifically, 361 is too large and 715 is too tall. Is that vague but
That,
specific enough?
We didn't mention sensitivity to the Westminster streetscape, which I think is another factor.
Can that be a separate?
Could be, yeah.
the criteria that the Historic Preservation Commission is charged with using speak directly to the streetscape.
Okay.
And I think Michael's proposal takes that into consideration too, the bulk of 361. I mean, that obviously would include the streetscape and the appearance
Well, I'm
there.
thinking more of that parking ramp, but
Yeah, I'm gonna get to that one, and it's just, I think that is worthy of its own discussion, because it's like a, I don't know, puzzle, where we're at now.
So I'd second the motion that Michael just made for the endorsing the site plan as generally presented, except, I can read it back, or Kathy can read it back.
any comments on the motion? All those commissioners in favor of passage of this motion say aye.
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 Could I have a roll call? I can't tell who said aye.
Commissioner Dixon?
Aye.
Commissioner Athenson?
Nay.
Commissioner Freeman?
Aye.
Chairman Kerr?
Aye.
Commissioner Artman Ruggles?
Aye.
Commissioner Moorhead?
Aye.
Okay.
5 ayes, 1 nay, the motion
Nay.
passes.
The motion passes. Back to
And-
Commissioner Freeman.
All right, and then I would make a motion that directs the petitioner to present the buildings and associated hardscape and landscape plans to the HPC for their review, public hearing, and approval, with 2 areas of specific focus. 1, the placement of the drive, preferably off the north-south street rather than than Westminster, and preferably between building 715 and 361, as opposed to the north end of the north-south street. And 2, the architectural interest of the west elevation of the southernmost unit of 715, with some flexibility, I think we said there, as to height, if it improved the overall architectural interest of that particular portion of 715.
Any comments to the motion? Any second for the motion?
I second it.
Motion's been seconded. Seeing no comments, I'd like to have a vote on this motion. And once again, I'd ask for a roll call.
Commissioner Moorhead?
Aye.
Commissioner Artman Ruggles?
Aye.
Chairman Kerr?
Aye.
Commissioner Freeman?
Aye.
Commissioner Athenson?
Nay.
Commissioner Dixon?
Aye.
Motion passes.
And then I'd just make a motion to move forward with staff recommendations 2, 5, and 6. Unless you want me to read them all in.
And those points were available to the public in the
Right.
packets outside. Okay. Is there a second for that motion?
Second that.
All those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 All those opposed?
Nay.
The motion passes 5-1. Now the question comes with the timing. It is now 11 o'clock, which is the, unfortunately due to the tornado watch, warning, but it's now time for meetings in the city of Lake Forest to end. And even if we were to give some incremental time for the Swift property, it seems that it wouldn't be enough.
It's up to the commission. You can extend the meeting by motion if you choose to do so. You can adjourn and provide direction to staff on whether we should schedule a special meeting.
Can we also limit the time overall?
15-minute
Actually, if
increments.
you approve a motion to extend the time, you should do it to a time certain.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No way we're gonna get
Yeah,
through
there's
it,
no
Michael.
way.
There's
No?
no way.
I don't think so.
How about just 10 minutes?
There's neighbors here, there's.
That's for your part of it, but then
Oh,
there
no,
are
no,
neighbors.
just 10 minutes. We have to set this over.
I'm sorry?
We have to set this over to the next plan commission. It wouldn't be fair.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah. it's
I'm
not-
amenable to setting it over, but I would like to chit-chat for maybe 10 minutes tops.
What?
Well, we can't, I don't want to be opening and reopening
Right,
public
yeah.
hearings,
Yeah.
but that's,
Because we would only get through a portion of it, and then, I mean, it's better just to present the whole
Yeah.
thing, and we're fresher, and everyone else is
I agree.
It's hard to
All right,
like
well, so
schedule it.
I
I'm
think it wouldn't
amenable
be
to
fair
setting
to-
it over. My only point is, the tentative plat that we wanted you to consider tonight is dated July 26th. So we've been in the queue for 45 days, so I would ask that we be slated number 1 on the agenda. And I think it's October 9th.
Yes.
And I'm supposed to be up in the Huron Mountains. I will make the drive home and drive back up there, but,
I would ask the commission, would you like us to poll to see if there is
Special meeting.
a date for a special meeting that would work?
Mhm.
So that we're not waiting a month?
I will not be available, as I think you know.
I mean, I'm open to
we,
it.
we can certainly do
Yeah,
that
we can-
offline, right? I mean, you can
Yes.
poll and see, and if we
Yes.
can't make it work, if we can, we'll give you an earlier date.
You will be first on the agenda whenever it's heard.
great. Thank you all.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
your
Now
patience.
the question is, do we take up the third agenda item, which should be brief, and have
true.
15 minutes time in which to do that?
I second that motion,
I think we
Okay.
could get through
I
that
think
one.
we can do that.
right before I recuse myself from consideration of this
Gotta
item.
sit down now.
Which should shorten the time considerably.
All right, our third public hearing and action item, and thank you, but we are continuing the meeting, if you could be quiet as you exit. Consideration of code amendments to sections 159.002, rules and definitions, and 159.003, interpretation of the city's zoning code to address recent legislation pertaining to recreational cannabis. This will be presented by city staff.
This code amendment comes to you at the
Yeah, ask if
direction
there's
of the
any
city
conflicts of
council,
interest or-
and it is in response to a bill that was
Okay, I'm
passed
sorry,
in.
but we
I'm sorry.
need to ask if there are any ex parte contacts or conflicts of interest.
No ex parte contacts, and I think it's more of a perception of a conflict, so I'll recuse myself, given my fiduciary duties to my employer.
Thank you. And we still have a quorum.
This matter comes to you at the direction of the city council, and it comes to you as a follow-up to action in May of 2019, when House Bill 1438 was passed and shortly thereafter signed into law by the governor. The law allows recreational marijuana dispensaries, use, and cultivation within the state of Illinois. The law goes into effect January 1st. The city council had a very brief discussion at a workshop and unanimously decided that the city of Lake Forest should not be out in front on this issue, understanding that this industry, the laws relating to cannabis are likely to evolve quite a bit over the next months and years. The council did direct the city staff to work with the city attorney to prepare code language that prohibited cannabis businesses of all types, dispensaries, lounges, cultivation centers within the city of Lake Forest. The code amendments, again, were prepared in collaboration with the city attorney. City staff has also been actively participating in the Lake County Task Force on recreational cannabis, so we are in communication with other municipalities. The task force includes many municipalities, representatives of police departments, finance departments, and planning. So the language, as proposed, amends several sections of the code in an effort to be clear that the intent is, for now, to ban all businesses related to cannabis. I would be happy to go through each code amendment.
Kathy, I think that's fine, and Commissioner, I would just make the motion to forward a recommendation to the City Council in support of the amendments to the zoning code as detailed above in what's been presented to us for purposes of prohibiting cannabis businesses in the city of Lake Forest.
Could I just ask a question really quickly? Is it okay? if I
Yeah,
ask a
yeah,
question?
yeah, no, absolutely.
So I just wanted to.
Generally, it would be after the motion's been
Oh,
seconded.
after the motion, okay, because I just have a quick question about medical marijuana.
So if you
So
second the
can someone
motion, I
second
can
the motion?
respond.
Second. Okay.
So
Yes.
I'm just curious, does this also cover, I know this covered recreational, but does it cover medical marijuana too? Or is that a whole separate category?
This purposely just speaks to recreational cannabis. The city code currently does not permit medical cannabis dispensaries. The first businesses that are going to be licensed for recreational cannabis are medical cannabis businesses that are already established. There are none in the city of Lake Forest. So it was a conscious decision to speak specifically to recreational. Again, this is evolving. I do expect that as we see what other communities do, as perhaps legal challenges come up, that we will be coming back to you. But for now, based on the city attorney's recommendation, this language is what the city attorney's office recommends we move forward with.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of passing the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion carries. Seeing no further businesses,
Do we need to make a motion on that second point under the staff recommendation as well? To get that, to direct the staff to continue to monitor the issue, or is that,
We are doing that anyway.
okay?
We'll,
Checking out procedure.
yep.
we'll take that direction without a motion. We will certainly continue to monitor the issue.
Duly noted.
Then seeing no further business, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Oh, my.
Sorry.
No, you
Cut you off.
got it.
Cut you off of the garbage.